No? Oh. Okay. Good evening. I would like to call to order the special meeting of the COSD 303 School Board on Monday, September 20th, 2021 at 5:31. Welcome, everybody. Ms. Marson, the roll call, please.
Mrs. Bell? Here. Mrs. Fairgrave?
Here.
Mr. Lackner?
Here.
Mrs. McCabe?
Here.
Mr. McNally?
Here.
Miss Weibel?
Here.
And Mrs. Barker?
Here. Please stand for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and
Okay, so Dr. Pearson, you have a superintendent's report for us?
I do. Thank you so much. I actually have a couple of items that I'd like to update the board on. First of all, I'm happy to announce that this week is actually homecoming week at East High School. So for the first time in a long time, we actually did have a school-wide assembly this afternoon on the football field. We weren't sure we were going to make it. It was originally scheduled for this morning, but due to the rain, we had to flip-flop the day a little bit. But we were able to hold that event, and it was really great to have the whole school together out on the field this afternoon. And so we look forward to continuing to have events throughout the week. I'd like to mention that on Friday, of course, at 1 o'clock is the parade. So you are welcome to attend. It will be back on Main Street downtown. And so we are really excited to have that opportunity. And for those of you that are North High School families or would like to know their dates as well, theirs is October the 11th through the 15th. And we'll have a very similar schedule for their events. So look for that. I also wanted to mention that the fall iReady testing has been completed as of Friday. Kindergarten was the last grade level to test. Pretty much every other grade level should have received their parent reports home. The kindergarten reports will go home this coming Friday. So students should be able to begin using their MyPath reading and math program, which allows them to kind of have personalized pathways based on their assessment data. So that is completed. Last year, one of the things that we actually did complete during the pandemic was a realignment of the Alliance for College and Career Readiness with the Community College District 509, which is ECC. We worked actually the entire year with Ed Systems out of NIU to reorganize that alliance. There's actually new requirements in the Perkins 5, which is the federal grant that funds much of the career readiness pathways. And so we worked with Ed Systems to kind of realign the structure and how that organization functions. I'm telling you that because we actually have our first governing board meeting in I think next week. And we'll be bringing to you a new intergovernmental agreement, which actually guides the way this organization functions. I serve on the governing board with the other superintendents from the other member districts, as well as Dr. Som, who is the ECC college president. So I look for more information on that. I just wanted to highlight that for you, that work was actually completed. It's actually now called the Alliance for College, Career, and Student Success. So we are actually very excited about the new structure. It allows us to better align some of the pathways, career pathways. As you can imagine, some of those programs are very expensive when you think about the facilities and some of the equipment that's required for the training. And we want to make sure that there's a connection between what's happening in our K-12 schools, as well as at the junior college and then on to the college level, in addition to connections to career pathways. So that will be coming forth. I also wanted to mention that last week, actually, the Illinois chapter of the National School Public Relations Association, also known as NSPRA, held their annual event. And our district, Mrs. Smith and her staff were actually awarded 5 awards at that event, 3 awards of excellence, one for the staff one of the staff messages that we did last year in the in-house video category, one for an article that Mrs. Smith wrote for IASB Journal last year, one for a speech that she delivered. There was also an award of merit for our annual report and an award of merit for one of our podcasts. So congratulations to our communications department for their recognition for all of their hard work from last year. And that completes the superintendent's report. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So Dr. Pearson, will a summary be coming back to the board related to the fall iReady results?
Yeah, so we will be bringing the student achievement data forward. Sure.
Okay. What's the timeline for that?
Normally that's in November because all of the other student achievement data is embargoed, all the IAR data, all the state data. So we do it in November every year with the student achievement report.
And Dr. Pearson, that'll be at the L&T November usually.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we do not have any citizens' comments this evening. So we will move right to our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Is there any item that anyone would like to pull from the consent agenda? Okay, I'm seeing that there isn't. So we'll move on to the roll. Ms. Merson?
Mrs. Fairgrave,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Miss Weibel,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
and Mrs. Barker.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Okay, moving along. We have 2 for information items. The first one is the new Citizens Advisory Committee members. Mrs. McCabe, Mrs. Bell, as the co-chairs, would you like to say anything before the appointments?
Well, we're very excited. We have been through the process of interviewing and making the selection, which was not easy by any means. It took us quite a while to narrow the field from 70 down to, I think, 12. I believe almost everyone in the audience is a member now. Would you mind standing up and do you mind, Mrs. Barker, if they introduce themselves?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna call their names and then, so when I call their names,
Whatever
that
you
might be a
wanna do.
great time to do that. Mrs. Bell, did you want to say anything?
I just wanted to let you all know that for those of you that are here or those of you that are watching, really appreciated everyone that supplement or submitted an application. Like Mrs. McCabe said, it was a very difficult decision because we had so many interested candidates, which I personally think, and I believe I speak for Mrs. McCabe in the sense that we were very excited to have so much interest. So it was a good problem to have. And for the general public and for the new members, I want everyone to know that the selection process was extremely intentional. And that's why it took so long. We were making sure we had voices from a wide range of the community, and we wanted to make sure to do our very best to really have the majority of or every voice as much as you can do that. I'm sure it's not foolproof, but we tried. So I'm really excited to start this journey and welcome aboard.
Okay, so I'd like to formally welcome the new appointees to the CUSD 303 Citizens Advisory Committee. If you would stand and you can introduce yourself when I call your name. Lauren Carter.
The list is in alphabetical order, just so
It is.
you all know.
By last name.
Hi,
Few seconds.
I'm Lauren Carter. I am a mom of 2. My sons are in 1st grade and 4th grade at Wild Rose. And I'm a small business owner. And I live in the Wild Rose neighborhood in St. Charles.
Thank
I'm
you.
very honored to be part of this. Thank you.
Monique Davis.
Hi, I'm Monique. I'm a mom of 3 kiddos. We live right in this area, Davis, Richmond, and Thompson this year. I am also very excited to help out. And we also are a family that fosters children, so we have a foster child with us as well. And I teach preschool in town here at St. Mark's.
Welcome. Thank you. Barbara Deepan.
Hello, I'm Barbara Deepan. I'm a mom of 2 children also in a D303, a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, one ADHD, one with anxiety, and I live in the South Elgin Sugar Ridge area.
Thank you. Fred Dederer.
Hello, I'm Fred Dederer, father of 4 boys, but just recently became an empty nester. My last one graduating from St. Charles North this past spring, and I recently became a grandfather. Thanks for the opportunity to be on this committee.
Congratulations. Okay, Jake Hill.
Hi, again, my name is Jake Hill. Been a resident of St. Charles for about 2 years now. Unlike my predecessors up here, I don't have any kids at the moment. So I like to bring a new, fresh perspective to the committee and the district. I've been employed with First American Bank for the past year, working in loan processing. So with the market as it is now, we've been fairly busy for the past year. But again, I really appreciate the opportunity to serve. I appreciate being selected, and I look forward to expanding good relationships with everybody. So thank you.
Well, thank you for taking an interest in the school district. Lori Lyons. Oh. May not be here today. No. Yeah. Tom Mullally.
Hi, good evening. My name's Tom Mullally. I've been in the D303 school district, I think now for about 27 years. I've graduated 4 kids from St. Charles, 3 from St. Charles East, and 26 from St. Charles North. So there's a story behind it all that if anyone wants to know, please contact me and I'll fill you in. But no, my wife and I have hosted exchange students for a number of years. My youngest daughter was a member of the charter class at North. So I've been certainly involved at North for many years since its beginning. I'm excited. I'm excited to be part of building D303 and looking forward to a bright future.
Welcome and thank you. Jennifer Shu.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Shu. I have 2 children, twins at Wasco in the 2nd grade. I have a background in teaching and in healthcare, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, I apologize. I missed the P's. Janelle Picket.
Hi, I'm Janelle Picket. I have 2 kids at North, a senior and a junior. And we are excited to be part of this process and making D303 move positively forward. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Jim Piper.
Good evening, Jim Piper. Thank you for the opportunity to serve and volunteer. The father of 3 boys in the district. I've got a freshman and a junior at St. Charles North and a 7th grader right over here at Thompson. So thank you again. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Amy Sheridan.
My name is Amy Sheridan. I moved here 19 years ago, specifically for the schools.
At this point, 3 of my kids have graduated from East and my 4th is a sophomore at St. Charles East. By trade, I am a CPA, been a CFO and done some other things in industry. And I'm really looking forward to being involved with in any way that we can help.
Thank you. David Strickland.
Good evening. My name is David Strickland. I've lived in the St. Charles area for over 20 years. My youngest is now a senior at St. Charles East. He's on a 504 program, so I've had some really good experiences over the last few years and understanding a lot more about the school systems and what you guys have to go through with kids with learning disabilities and who are on different programs, whether they're IEPs or 504. So I feel like, you know, now it's my turn to give back. I think the school system, District 303 has done a phenomenal job with my child. He's a senior. Cross some fingers, we get him graduated this year. But I'm looking forward to it, and I have time in my schedule. So I thought, what a better way to join in than join this committee and help you guys out. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Don Williams. All right, well, that concludes the appointment of the new Citizen Advisory Committee members. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Our next for information item. Would we like to do a round of applause? Sure. Okay. Again, welcome and thank you. So our next for information item is district enrollment. I would like to call your attention that this is the initial district enrollment that you had for information in your packet. I'm just going to highlight 2 things. We are having a much longer full enrollment presentation to the board at the L&T committee Monday, October 18th, is my understanding. And the reason it makes sense to do that more full presentation in October is that there's a date, October 15th, that official enrollment data is pulled for the state. So it makes sense to do it in October. But there's some initial highlights that I will just kind of call your attention to. The overall enrollment is slightly down from projections. It is up in elementary schools and it is lower than expected in secondary schools. And then the other item is about Compass Academy. Although there are 83 students attending, in total, there are only 26 are enrolled as full-time students. The other 57 are splitting their time between Compass and their assigned high school. So that's 2 things to note. Okay, so that brings us for discussion. And the first item for discussion is board goals. So Dr. Pearson, when you are ready, take it away.
Great. Well, we are very excited as a district leadership team to have the opportunity to engage in this conversation with you tonight as we focus on both a structure for our board and district goals, and then also some tangible measurements and lead and lag measures, which we're going to talk about this evening. Just to give you some information as we think about the structure, and let's see if I can make this work. It's thinking. Maybe not. All right, here we go. We're going to try this.
You told us it would work.
It's acting like it wants to work, but. All right, it's not going to work. Yeah, so we're just going to go to the next slide. So as we think about kind of the components of the plan as it's presented, there are, of course, our board and district commitments that are included. And then we look at some of the other components of the structure. We have identified some long-term goals for each of those commitments, as well as what we're calling indicators of success, or ways that we plan to measure our progress around the goals. You'll see that we will ultimately have in the document the current state, where we are now in relation to those goals, as well as what are going to be long-term measures for progress. So we hope to set 3-year benchmarks or goals for each of the areas, as well as an annual benchmark, a yearly benchmark. You'll also see in the document ultimately that there will be lead actions or activities or strategies that we hope to use to address those lag measures, and then also a timeline. So that's kind of the structure of what you're going to see tonight. Of course, I want to start with kind of reminding everyone of our connection between the board and district commitments. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that our strategic commitments are on the side: innovative learning, responsible stewardship, quality staff, and community relations. This chart actually then overlays the board commitments that have been identified, as well as the district commitments for each of those categories. And you can see, for example, if you look at the second board commitment under innovative learning, monitor and continue to improve our safe and secure learning environments for our students and staff, that belongs there, but it also belongs in responsible stewardship. So if it falls into any of the other categories, we've repeated it in this chart. But this just shows you, as we think about our strategic commitments as a district: innovative learning, responsible stewardship, quality staff, and community relations, how that aligns with both the district and board commitments. If we go to the next slide, you're going to see that as we were working through our outcomes, we kind of had a conversation about how all of these commitments align with a long-term goal, which we've phrased as ensuring that every student has college, career, and life competencies necessary to choose their post-secondary path. This is something that we want to have a broader discussion with the board about as we refine the goals, as to whether or not this is the right umbrella or overarching kind of goal for the work that we engage in as a district. I think that there are a couple of components here that are critical. The first is, of course, the recognition that our students are developing skills that will allow them to pursue post-secondary education opportunities, as well as post-secondary career opportunities or pathways. And that also, in addition to some of those academic and classroom kinds of learning experiences that we want to provide for students, or the foundation, that there are also life competencies, or what we are calling social and emotional learning, that we want to try to address. And then I think the second piece or component of this statement that we want to highlight is the word choose. We want to ensure that our students have the ability to make choices about their paths, whether they do that while they're with us or after they leave us. You know, we're all aware of students that have gotten to a post-secondary experience and maybe decided that they want to pursue a different pathway, or perhaps they've started in one career area and they want to go in a different career direction. And so we want to make sure that what we do as a district doesn't narrow opportunities for students, but instead it provides a broad path that students can make choices along the way, both while they're having their academic experiences and they're learning with us as a district, as well as once they leave our district, that they continue to have choices. So those are kind of two of the components of that goal that we've identified as a long-term goal, to kind of be the umbrella as we talk about all of the other individual components tonight. If we look at the next slide, you're going to see that in each of the 4 strategic commitments tonight, we're going to have what we're calling on-track indicators. This has it has significant meaning as we think about the innovative learning strategic commitment, because there is strong research behind some of the components that we've identified to be critical as we think about whether or not a student is on track for college and career readiness, or for opportunities beyond their secondary education. So if you look at this indicator, you'll see that some of the indicators that are highly predictive of post-secondary success include the proficiencies in ELA, math, and SEL skills at key points in time. And so you're going to see us talk tonight about kind of moments in time during a student's academic career that we're hoping to have a pulse check or to ensure that students are continuing to be on track. Some of them in the research are outlined as on track indicators or times when they should be reaching certain benchmarks. Other times you're going to hear them talked about as early warning indicators, which means that when students aren't meeting those expectations or standards, that would be a moment that we would want to ensure that we have robust interventions in place to help address those concerns. So depending on when and what the indicator actually is, it could be an on-track indicator or it could be an early warning indicator, which you'll see both of those represented. I think the other piece that we have some research that suggests is ensuring that students have successful transitions between elementary and middle and high school, and then of course high school to post-secondary experiences are critical. And then there is research around certain courses that have been attributed to being on track for college and career readiness. So at this time, I'm going to actually have Dr. Igo begin to kind of talk us through some of the key components as we think about innovative learning, the innovative learning strategic commitment.
So like Dr. Pearson said, those on-track indicators really do come from some research, and they are attached to something called Pathways to Adult Success, which is a project, which is a component of the Johns Hopkins Everybody Graduates Center. So their big role is to do the research behind and find what are the things that we should be doing to make sure that we're continuing to make sure kids are able to obtain or on track to get those services kind of in place. The on-track indicators that we're going to talk about also this evening are aligned with our state accountability system. We've added a few others that are highly correlated with college graduation, but what we're talking about this evening will also be highly correlated with our state accountability so that we can start to see some kind of connection. People can see the connection between what we're doing and how all of these things kind of work together. One of the things that these indicators really allow for us to do is really for us to begin to think about our work from an EC to a 12+ perspective, right? It helps for us to emphasize the interconnectedness of all of the work that we do. That what we do in kindergarten actually builds upon the success that we are going to see in high school and how each of those things kind of work together to build that system. Additionally, what's important about these is that it also allows us to kind of monitor our system from a big picture view to let us know what are the systems and things we have in place for kids and are they right? But continuing to take that same data that we can then kind of drill it down all the way down to the student level and say, here are when we know students need something, need support, need help, we need an intervention. And so it helps again to help us see how all the things are connected and aligned. So those were kind of the things that drove us to think about kind of these on-track indicators. And when you look at these indicators, what they're really designed to do is to show those elementary indicators are really predictive of success in middle school. And those middle school indicators are predictive of success in high school. Those high school indicators are then predictive of success in college. And so each of those things are kind of along the way, help us kind of build each of those things. You'll see quite a few times on there where we talk about proficiency, ELA proficiency, math proficiency, SEL proficiency. And when we're talking about ELA, math, or SEL proficiency, we're really talking about whether students are meeting the state standards, whether they're meeting or exceeding on those state accountability tests. As you kind of look through and you look through each of those different indicators and how they come together, you'll see that at the elementary level, we're really focused in on building those basic literacy and math skills. So students are able to kind of continue to build and have the skills they need to be successful in middle school. In middle school, you'll see that we're going to focus in highly on transitioning students, maintaining those skills. And then as they move into high school, we're going to focus again on a successful transition to ninth grade, and providing opportunities for early college credit and industry credit, as well as securing those SEL skills. Meanwhile, we're always and constantly working towards SEL proficiency in all those ELA, math, science, all of those courses. So those are the things that kind of how all of those pieces kind of come together. Next slide. Some additional indicators that we've talked about that we feel are important for our students and within our context are that we really need to make sure that we are taking account of the climate and culture within our buildings. We know all learning occurs within the context of a caring and supportive relationship. So we need to have our pulse on how are students feeling? Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel as if they are connected to a teacher? Because that's going to push forward the academic learning. We also want to make sure that our systems and our processes that are in place are working for every student that we have. And so you'll see that we put in some indicators that relate to making sure that we've got high achievement across all of our groups of students, that we have high enrollment across all of our college level courses, and that if today we don't, that we have an opportunity to go in and make some changes along the way. And then we also put an emphasis or a monitoring tool in place around kind of our SAT score, our cumulative score. And the reason we did that is because that opens the door for a lot of students. That SAT score will help open opportunities for scholarships, for merit scholarships when they apply to school. And we want to make sure that we're giving, again, students as much choice as possible when they're ready for us, when they're ready to leave. Graduate, it's probably a better word. Next slide, please. So based upon that, we really kind of said, well, what are our 3-year targets? What are the things that we want to look at? And we really kept those 3-year targets open and had some flexibility in them. And the reason that we kept them a little bit open is that we wanted to be able to be flexible when we had the results of the equity audit. Depending on what's in there, that might give us some very specific things that we need to think about and begin to work on. When we do the work around building the portrait of a graduate, we want to be able to be flexible and be responsive to that, as well as the strategic planning process that we know we're going to begin. So making sure that we are focused on the big important things, but at the same time, allowing us a little bit of flexibility so that we can be nimble, if you will, based upon some of the things that we do this school year. Next slide. So with that, we kind of took a step and said, what are the action steps that we're going to be focused in on this year? And as we were building those action steps, we thought a little differently about how to think about where we were. And we started to think in terms of what are the things that we're planning or evaluating in terms of where are we on track? Are we going to need to do something? But we're just kind of in the beginning stages of where we need to go and begin to kind of put pieces of work together, as well as focusing in on implementation outcomes in terms of what are we actually implementing in classrooms with teachers, and then making sure that we put very specific things in place to support each of those things. So under those planning outcomes, we've got completing an equity audit that would inform our comprehensive equity plan. We have some curriculum development teams that we have to kind of finish up in that old process. So we're going to be working on that, as well as launching the new curriculum assessment and instruction process. And then kind of refining our MTSS system. Through implementation, we've got some new resources, some new instructional practices at each of those levels. And what we've done is we've tried to really bring together a comprehensive implementation plan and leverage all of the specialists that we have. For instance, our ISCs, our instructional support coaches. How are we leveraging them in elementary to support the new phonics program and the new units of study? We also leveraged our reading specialists to help support teachers with that embedded kind of learning along the way. The ISCs, we've also leveraged them at the high school when we're implementing the new math resources and the new math instructional practices. So we tried to think about who and all of the pieces we have in place and how can we be very comprehensive in supporting our teachers and implementing each of those new things. That takes us through kind of all the pieces for innovative learning at the high level.
So one of the things that we'd like to do at this point is just to take a moment and have a bit of a discussion. So if we can go back to the slide that has the on-track success indicators that have kindergarten, 3rd, 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. Yep, there you go. Because the first question that we want to make sure to answer is whether or not we've captured the key components that you as a board feel are critical as we think about student achievement and growth. So really when we talk about learning, we always want to look at two pieces, right? Achievement or attainment of certain standards. So when we talk about whether or not a student is proficient or exceeds on the state standards, those are achievement benchmarks. That's typically information that we have from IAR. At the same time, we want to ensure that students are making progress and expected progress in their own academic path. And so for that data, we would be looking at student growth, whether or not they're growing. There are students that are already meeting standards. And so as we think about their progression of learning, we want to be sure that they continue to grow in expected ways along their learning pathways. So as we look at this, of course, you're going to see, and we want to talk a little bit about kindergarten, for example. So earlier I mentioned that we have what we call early warning indicators, and we have readiness indicators. And although readiness skills at kindergarten are important, that is really our first early warning indicator, right? When we have students that come to us at kindergarten and they're not able to demonstrate what is considered to be the competencies for incoming kindergarten students, then we want to ensure that as early as possible, we start to provide supports and intervention. And so that would be kind of one of our very first benchmarks or places where we're going to collect some data about where students are with their learning. It also could inform areas or places or patterns where we need to ensure that we're reaching students prior to their entry into kindergarten, either through our early childhood programming or other kinds of birth to 5 programming in the community. As you know, we have the Early Learning Partnership that is really important that you as a board have supported, that allows us to begin to work with families very early in their child's development to help them acquire some of these readiness skills. So this data is going to be critical for us as we think about students and where they are when they come to us in kindergarten and how we can support their growth. Then you're going to see, of course, in 3rd and 5th grade that we have those proficiency indicators, which of course is meeting and exceeding standards at those 2 grade levels. In addition to that, we of course are going to be collecting growth data and we're going to be disaggregating that data. So that's going to be important for us to look across different subgroups and ensure that all students are achieving at levels that are expected. So that's the elementary piece. And I think we can pause for just a moment and just see if there's anything for elementary that you feel like is missing that you as a board would want to ensure that we have included for their on-track success indicators.
I don't have anything specifically for elementary, but I just want to ensure I am further grounded as far as these on-track success indicators were developed based on research.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, can you recap what that is again?
Sure. So there's a center called the Pathways. Hold on. The Center for Adult Success Pathways. What they do is their whole kind of mission is to go in and review all the different research. Kind of it started as an idea around this early warning signals of when our kids not on track. And they've then taken that data and expanded it to include college readiness indicators. And so there's various different studies kind of across the United States that allow us to take a look at how that works. What typically happens is they do it from like a cohort perspective. They say this class graduated in 2010. Let's see where they are in 4 years and 6 years and 8 years. And then they walk backwards to say, what were the things that were helping them be successful? And they focus in very specifically around indicators that are readily available, that are easy to act upon, that aren't kind of summative in nature. And that they're easily available, allow us to act on them, but yet still have high leverage. So they don't necessarily get us to, here's why this is happening. It's very much a broad picture of, okay, now maybe we have to go in and do some digging and kind of reassure, but it is definitely grounded in lots of research, which I'm happy to share with you in regards to how they got there. And then research is continuing today. So it's not as if we're done. They're constantly coming back to and reviewing and fine tuning. And they talk about that you have to kind of find the right set of indicators for your particular environment. So there'll be opportunities for us to look at that as well.
And so I appreciate the point that it's ongoing, which it should be. For purposes of this discussion and exercise, what's the time frame of the research?
This research began back in, I believe it was like 2005 was the very first time around early warning signals. And it's been continuing there are studies that have been released from 2019 and 2020 that go back and continue to support that these are the things that work.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask a question. So we're looking at the 30,000 view. So it would make sense to me that I would want to see more quantitative specifics for our different groups of students. So while we're looking at following a student K through 12 kind of in progression, what are our growth numbers and proficiency from group to group? So for instance, K through 2, 3 through 5, 6, 8, 9 through 12. So if we were to look at current proficiencies and what we would expect in trajectory in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year trajectory, I would want to see on this more quantitative numbers on what the trajectory is. That coming?
Yeah, so
It
that's a
is.
really important point, right?
Okay.
So as you think about kind of the structure that I talked about earlier, where we have these indicators, so this is the indicator. Then under that indicator, we're of course going to have current state. So the number of the percentage of students that are on track at that grade level in that subject area, as well as what the 3-year goals are or the lag measures for that particular group. So you'll see both numbers. Now, part of the reason why we don't see those tonight is, first of all, we want to make sure we have the right indicators represented. But second, as you know, there's a big component of our student achievement data that's not public yet. It's still it's embargoed by the state until the end of October. So we can't share with you current IAR data until that data has been released from the state report card. So once we have that, we'll go back and populate a spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet that has all of the indicators and the current state, and then also the targets based on where students are now.
Okay, and while these are on track success indicators, you said, are there any other areas that we would want to focus on? And I know you said specifically elementary, but when you look at K through 12, how are we going to manage the different silo performers? So, for instance, we know historically that special ed has not been a silo that's performed well in any of these on-track success indicators. So are we breaking that out later as just a group that we'll be watching in particular? And are we reforming that process or?
Certainly. So we talked about kind of those on-track indicators, and then that next slide where we did other indicators, we talked about taking those and breaking them out. And so we will be monitoring that. So very specifically around our IEP, our EL students, our Black students and our Hispanic students, our
different
groups
siloed minorities
that
right?
are groups that are
Socioeconomic,
typically,
right?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I should have said that one.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Well, I mean, we've talked about different kinds of silos, so.
Yeah. So we'll break all the data down in that same way to make sure, again, when we're talking about making sure every kid is performing and our systems are working for every student, that's us taking that data apart and making sure that there isn't a group of students that isn't being successful. And if they're not, why? And then what are
And
we
then
gonna
how do
about
we
that?
tie that back into the indicators for these are the same indicators we're going to be valuing them on, just depending on which group.
Correct. So we'll look at all the third graders that are on track,
Mhm.
and then we'll say, now let's look at those third graders on track by subgroup.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure we're figuring out how we're breaking it down.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Did you want to talk a little bit about the SEL kind of benchmarks? Because we've kind of placed those here at the end of elementary school, the end of middle school, and the end of high school. And clearly, students are progressing in their social and emotional development, and they're learning all the way through their high school experiences. But we kind of indicated these moments in time to kind of collect that data and to monitor it, because it's kind of a transition time from some of the different skills that we're addressing. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. So when we looked at the SEL, we really thought in terms of what is it we need them by the time they leave us, particularly at the elementary. We want to give students the opportunity to build those skills over time, and that we're kind of monitoring those pieces, and then we're monitoring them as they move in and as they move between each level. So specifically around kind of self-management, self-awareness, decision-making, those are we're looking at all three of those domains, but at different points in time, different domains are going to become more important. And there's still a lot of research out there that hasn't been real definite in saying it's this or it's this or it's this at each level. So that's kind of why we decided we're going to monitor all three. But I would imagine over time, as this research continues to come out, we're going to see ourselves say it's really at the end of fifth grade, what's most important is self-management and it's self-regulation. And at the end of eighth grade, it's executive functioning and the ability to continue to move forward. And at high school, it's going to be being able to weigh and make those positive decisions. But because that research is still in the works, we're going to monitor all three of those kind of across the time. And kind of by placing them at the end, the way the SEL standards are currently written, they're written like in K2 chunks, 3, 5, 6, 8. So that allows us to think about those standards kind of within those same chunks of time.
When we go back to the indicators, so if I'm a parent, which I was and am, I would look at the indicators and I would expect that grade K, grade 3, grade 5, that my elementary child, because we're focusing on elementary right now, would be evaluated on indicators of ELA and math every time.
They will be. This is for us to get a big picture view.
Right. I guess I would still expect us to use those indicators as a big picture view every time we're looking at the data.
Sure.
So I know the material you said, as Mrs. Fairview asked, came from research as to how you kind of check in with the data points. Is there a downside to doing ELA and data indicator check-ins in K3 and 5 other than just the amount of data?
I think it's the big picture of kind of how much, but it's also thinking in terms of when is it that we need kids to have actually mastered it. That doesn't mean teachers aren't looking at that data each and every step of the way and kind of monitoring and watching where kids are and doing what we need to do. But like, for instance, reading by the end of third grade, there's a lot of research that says that's kind of the key point in time, right? That's when we really want to work on that piece. That's when kids need to really have that skill in place. So that's kind of why, as we're thinking about it from a big picture view, we want to check in at that point in time to make sure that the students are kind of on track at that point in time. And if we have a significant number that aren't, then we need to think about what are we doing? Is there something within our system that is the barrier, or is it something, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, so you're measuring your indicators by benchmark achievement, basically. Is that kind of?
And especially the younger kids, right? Because we know between birth and age 8, students grow and change at such significantly different rates. We're far better thinking about what's the end result versus trying to have kids on a specific schedule.
Right,
of time.
because some of them learn at different rates.
Right.
I appreciate that, especially K5. So that makes sense in the sense of your benchmark for ELA. And so the proficiency in math, I'm assuming that's testing your basic arithmetic rate. I mean, back in the old days, it was subtraction, addition.
It would be the standards.
Yeah, the standards, right? I know it's a little bit different now. They jumble it all together. And so that makes sense. So I might need a little bit more explaining about the benchmarks when it comes to 6 through 12.
Okay.
Because for me, I would assume we would look at SAT every year, like 9 through 12. So if you can expand on some of that as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Be happy to.
Does that make sense to my colleagues on the board as to what I'm asking though?
Yeah. I
Okay.
understand.
Yeah.
I think, I want to ask, we're still going to see our student achievement report with all of that
Absolutely.
information in it,
Absolutely.
right? That's.
Yeah,
not
that will
going
be
to-
available for everybody to look at, but I think when we're thinking about where are we at and how do we, when you're up here, knowing where, and again, making sure we're looking big picture and checking in at each step of the way, that's what that provides us. It's not that we wouldn't, that data is not available, because it will certainly be available on a part of the report.
So a clarifying question, I'm interested in why we chose the 3-year mark to be the point where we measure
The 3-year
progress.
mark.
Well, I think Dr. Pearson had mentioned that under each indicator, we would naturally see the current state, and then underneath that, our 3-year goal, and then I would expect the results compared to that. So I'm just interested in why we picked 3 years.
I believe we were hoping to kind of put ours in a spot, and Dr. Pearson, that we're kind of expanding beyond 1-year goals so that we could start to build, be able to build it kind of long-term goals kind of along the way.
Yeah, and within that, I don't want you to miss that there's also yearly benchmarks. So we'll set yearly targets. So if, let's say, we're at 35% of kindergartners come with readiness skills, and from 3 years from now, we want to be at 60%, right? So we'll have some incremental benchmarks along the way, and it's in here for each year. There will be yearly benchmarks that help us get to that kind of 3-year outcome. So we're going to kind of look 3 years out, because if you think about so if you look at, like you saw the planning and the implementing, and you think about kind of how the time it takes us to plan and implement something. So let's say that we've decided, well, phonics is a good example. So we identified the phonics piece was something that we needed to add to our ELA curriculum. Well, last year, teachers worked through the process to select the resource. They did the presentation last spring. This is their first year of implementation. They're receiving coaching and support, and they're working through their PLCs, and we're doing implementation support. And we think about when we feel like that's going to be fully implemented, kind of in that change cycle, it's typically 3 to 5 years, right, before we have something that's fully implemented. So as we think about an intervention or something that we're going to put in place to try to address a concern, we would hope that within 3 years, that's fully implemented and we're able to see some results. So I think that's kind of why we picked the 3-year mark. And then, of course, along the way, we're going to have those annual targets that will help us get to that goal.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure that we would have some type of annual trending and assessment of progress rather than waiting till the 3-year mark. I would envision we should course correct prior to 3 years if things are not trending in the right direction.
Right. And it's also important to think too, if we're looking at a single assessment and we're thinking about student growth, it's never linear, right? So students, they'll take the test and they'll be here, and then it'll be here, and it looks more like a scatter plot than it actually does look like a straight line. And so we want to make sure we're using multiple measurements, and then we're also looking at multiple points in time before we're making big decisions about holistic groups of students.
I have a couple questions. Just to point out, anytime a teacher sees a red flag or sees that a student is not performing, they're not going to wait till the board gets their goals to let a parent know the student. Okay.
Yes,
I just
absolutely.
want- it's hard to remember that the board is way at a higher level, but we're the systems people. So I think the questions you're getting are really important, because it says, how is the system going to know? But when you get down to the child level, there are other eyes going on.
Absolutely.
So I have a couple of questions. First, to answer your question, what's missing? I wondered why we wouldn't have math at third grade and ELA at fifth grade. I get the third grade proficiency at ELA, that's old research that's very strong. But I would really like us to keep an eye on math.
Absolutely. So the purpose of doing it at fifth grade is that's the state accountability system. They have us doing ELA at third grade and math at fifth grade.
We're not doing math at third grade?
Still give the assessment, but as far as like when we're accountable for the benchmarks for the state report card.
Oh, correct. So they have kind of identified also some of these key points in time. And so they had fifth grade math and so in an effort to stay aligned and to make sure that we've got some consistency in what we're doing. And I believe the research behind that is that we want to give kids all the way through fifth grade because it's through that point in time that they're going to build those solid basic skills. They're going to understand, right, how to construct and deconstruct numbers and how fractions work. Like if we think big picture, that's what kids need to know and be able to do by the time they leave elementary school to be successful in middle school.
I guess I'm going to push a little harder then. I see that those would be the key components to make sure we're on track. But I would also like to have, as a board member, what's going on with third graders, because that's when we begin to move away from number sense.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that we don't miss the kind of the design of this. As a board, you're still going to get for every single year, math and reading, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, ninth grade. You're going to see the progress. These are those big moments when we want to make sure that we've reached a benchmark with students. We want to make sure that at third grade that those literacy skills are developed, and that's going to be the big goal. And that, as you mentioned, there's significant research around third grade literacy and how predictive that is of future success and future readiness. There's research around fifth grade math and saying that having those numeracy skills and having that math literacy at fifth grade is important because they make a transition in their development as they move into middle school and more advanced mathematics. So by that moment in time, we want to make sure that we're reaching that benchmark. We're not suggesting that we're not going to monitor every grade level every year. We're not suggesting that we're not going to monitor disaggregated groups of students every year. We're not suggesting, and I mean, our teachers do a great job, and I want to make sure that we recognize it in their PLCs, that they and their formative assessments, they're continually monitoring student progress related to the standards along the way. You also have now, as a district, we have IAR, iReady, which gives us, these formative assessments that then give us information for teachers now that they can then respond. So I don't want anybody to feel like, as we talk about these kind of major benchmark points in time, that we're suggesting that those other components are going away. They will still inform our progress towards these goals, but these are the moments when they're most critical for us to ensure that students are meeting these benchmarks.
Can I, so as real quick, as a follow-up then to the John Hopkins piece, which is kind of one of our cornerstones of this proposed strategy, is fifth grade identified as the only critical point for math in elementary?
It is not. It's actually not identified at all through that research.
Okay.
It was identified through the state accountability system as a checkpoint.
Okay, thank you.
So how different are these measures?
I wasn't done, but go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Sorry, I would still like to see it. So I hear what you're saying. I believe that you're absolutely right about all of the research. I just think it's as critical at third grade as it is at fifth grade. So that's ELA for sure at third grade, no problems, and probably not as important at fifth grade. That's not the right terminology, but I really think we need a dipstick at third grade for math.
I'm just going to jump in real quickly. I agree with Mrs. McCabe on that point. I don't want to wait for the state to tell us. And that's something I think we need to do on our own. So I understand of course, teachers are constantly monitoring. I know that. But if we can take that more global look at third grade as well, because if they're off track on third grade, by the time they get to fifth grade, that's going to be a problem, and it's going to be an unsolvable problem.
And if we look at it at systems level, what do we need to do K through 3 if we need to make curriculum changes or instructional changes? That's where I'm coming from. The only other thing that for elementary that I'm curious about is how will these indicators, and actually it'll go across the whole thing. How will these indicators change anything we're doing now? Do you are the things that are success indicators already in place? And then if what's new, and how do you see this changing instruction or the process of the work that is going on right now? And that's my list.
I can start an answer, and then I'm going to let Dr. Igo speak to it as well. So I think the first thing is that we're trying to recognize the predictive power of these moments in time based on research to say these are times when we really should be looking at collective efficacy for our students, whether or not they're able to meet these benchmarks. We've not used these particular, and you're going to see some in secondary that we've really not ever looked at in this way. Not that we don't consider these pieces, but we haven't aggregated it in this way to try to understand whether or not a student is on track. And so I think that's the big change, is that we've kind of said, look, these are moments in time based on the research that we know that if students are missing these benchmark moments, that there's a higher probability that they're going to be off track for those college and career readiness experiences. So I think that's different than what we've done before. I think we've always acknowledged that English language arts and math proficiency is critical, and we have tried to address that. But I think that this is an attempt to tie the strategy to some of the research that's out there. So that's the first part of the answer. And then Dr. Igo, I don't know if you want to talk to some of the
Sure. And I think the other piece is that it kind of connects all of the things that we're doing, right? And so it allows our team to have very quick, actionable data that they can respond to. And by no means are we saying we wait until a student is off track to intervene. That is not at all the message that we want. But what we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're monitoring that and we're catching it quickly. And we're able to be nimble and fast and be like, whoa, something's not quite right. And so that allows us to really get into at that student level, but it also allows us to stay kind of at that systems level, right? It's data that we have that we're able to move and kind of monitor quickly. And we can start to see what's happening and what's working and what's not, so that we can be also responsive to where we need to go.
So maybe to clarify, because I can hear people saying, well, you didn't set any targets because the data's embargoed. So are you just twiddling your thumbs and waiting until the board sets these targets? The data is not just the IAR. That is a summative piece.
Correct.
So just to be really clear, if we are setting these benchmarks, teachers are going to be getting data daily from, and I assume thinking about how to change their instruction to be sure that students are on track for whatever the target is at that moment. Is that
that's absolutely
so
correct.
Just because we don't have IAR public data right now, it doesn't mean that we're just waiting until.
Correct.
I think respectfully, we're getting a little bit in the weeds, if you don't mind. I feel like. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm worried about the content of the rest of the presentation. And I know Mr. Wagner had a comment. Did you have more questions?
No, I
know
just
it's not
wanted
my
to
place
follow
do
up and
this.
clarify.
It's not my place. I'm worried that we're spending a lot of
I
time
am
on this.
too, and I only had 3 questions.
I have one quick one
Mr.
about,
Lack-
oh,
hang on for a
I'm
second.
sorry,
I
I'm
want to
sorry.
get to Mr. Lagner because he had a question.
Thank you, Mrs. McCabe. I appreciate the the floor, Mrs. Barker as well. Many of the questions I had you asked, so I appreciate the focus. The categories are clear. The question is, what are the benchmarks and the measures and the distances that we expect to travel within each of these categories that I think will be critical. I think if I heard Dr. Pearson rightly, he'd bring those back in the next conversation. The opening question had to do with what content was missing. There's a lot embedded within SEL, and it looks like we're talking about maybe a different measurement system for SEL, if I read this rightly, different from the measurement system that was used previously, which showed quite an even and positive amount of output associated with SEL measures. So question number 1 is about that. Question number 2 is a kind of a small one embedded within that SEL. Dr. Pearson talked about a lot of different capabilities that students might need. And that caused me to ask, what about measures associated with things like financial literacy or other civic engagement measures that aren't covered necessarily by direct coverage of algebra or ELA as it's defined here, or measured in the social and emotional portions as we've measured them previously? What are your thoughts?
So I think, and if I'm not on, please stop me and redirect me to the right if I'm not answering your question correctly. I think what you're asking is, how do we kind of check in on those things? And so there is some research at the high school level that indicates students that engage in community service or that's how one way they are more likely to be civilly engaged and engaged in a process later in life. So that is something we could certainly go back and look at to figure out if that is something we want to think about or put in place. In regards to financial literacy in particular, that is something that is required as a graduation requirement for students, and it is definitely covered. When I think about kind of the big picture of where we are, thinking about our systems, I'm not sure that the idea of specifically around literacy or financial literacy would necessarily fit in.
So if I hear you rightly, we have a set of research from Johns Hopkins that says these are the variables that are important for correlating with some measure of adult success. We're going to monitor those variables over time and track our progress against them. If I hear you rightly saying as well that a specific measure on financial literacy is not highly correlated or is not contributory, and we have a graduation requirement associated with it. Do I have that about right?
That is correct.
Okay. So follow-up question then. What's the definition of success that the Johns Hopkins program uses in order to look at these correlations?
The ones that we have identified are highly correlated with students finishing a 4-year degree. So it's not only did students enroll in college, but it's the likelihood that they will finish college. So again, with our vision being that we want to make sure kids have choices, we want to make sure we've given them every opportunity and put them on the path to being able to, if that's the path they want to go down, they can absolutely do that. They can choose not to go to college, but should they come back 2 years later and decide that's what they want, they're still on path to do that.
And I want to mention too, because I hear what you're saying, that it could be more comprehensive than just these academic outcomes. And we do think that that's important. You're going to see represented later in kind of the community relations goal that one of the steps that we hope to take as part of our strategic planning process is actually to complete what's called a profile of a graduate, which are all of the competencies that as a community we think are critical for students to possess as they leave our district and graduate. And so that profile of a graduate very well could include financial literacy as a component. It could include community service, and many of them do have that as a component. And so once we identify those pieces for the profile of a graduate, we absolutely then we'll begin to track each of those components for our graduating seniors to ensure that we're helping students achieve those goals. So I think that that's a really important layer that is not maybe represented right here in these academic achievement targets, but I would think it really should drive then how we shape all of these other goals once that's been developed by the community.
So we were at K-5, or we're not at K-5 anymore. Are we still at K-5?
I don't think necessarily we need to divide the conversation that way. I think it's, whatever is coming to your mind at the time, ask.
Okay, I think it's really important for 9 through 12, in my opinion, that we look at SAT every year as part of an indicator. I see on here it's only 1 year as an indicator. And I appreciate that. That's junior year. So can you expand on that, Dr. Igo?
Take a look at, I just want to bring your attention to the other planning document where there are yearly benchmarks and 3-year goals, lag measures, where SAT is noted.
So again, to Ms. Weibel, as you're mentioning that and looking at that piece, I think it's important to realize that the actual SAT, that students take that as a junior, right? That's the moment in time that they take it junior or senior year. They can take it before that if they want to, but for state accountability purposes, it's the junior year. And then of course we have the PSATs up to that point for 8, 9, and then 10 that give us information about their progress towards their
So we're not
SAT
using
readiness.
PSAT as a benchmark. Sorry, and I should have clarified that. not
Yeah,
SAT.
so just like we're going to track for every other academic area every year student progress, we certainly are going to watch students' progress for the PSAT when they take it and their predictive scores as it relates to their ultimately their SAT. But we don't have it identified as an annual piece, because really what we want to watch is, number one, whether or not students are proficient on the SAT in ELA and math using the state proficiency cut, which I think is 540. And then, which is interesting because Illinois actually has a higher cut score for proficiency than the College Board does for SAT. So when you think about that assessment, so that's one measurement that we want to watch. And then of course, the other measurement that we want to watch is we want to set an aggregate score for composite for our entire district to see an increase over time. We want to see that score go up. And when we look at that, we will be looking at the student's best score on the assessment. So as you know, students take the assessment multiple times. Some students do, and sometimes they score better and sometimes they score worse. And ultimately, when they get ready to submit their score to universities, they are able to super score their application. And so we want to track that average of the best score for our students on the SAT. So both of those pieces are going to be important.
Thank you. One quick thing that was sort of piggybacking on both what Mrs. McCabe and Mr. Lackner said for SEL with regards to that, are we also looking at SEL each and every year, not just the benchmark years? I'm assuming that's the case, but I want to make sure I understand it clearly.
Yes, starting in 3rd grade, we'll have students participate in the Panorama survey, which takes into account what's their perception of their SEL skills across the domains. So we will do that at every point in time, every year, 3rd through 12th grade, and we'll have that information to again guide us in what we're doing. These are again meant to be leverage points to make sure we're on track to meet that very large goal that every kid's going to leave us ready to make a choice about their post-secondary options.
And just because I'm not really sure what are we using to assess those SEL benchmarks, and can you speak to why it's not looked at, or in what way is it looked at prior to 3rd grade?
Well, the reason we don't necessarily do it in third grade is that, again, it's that birth to 8, kind of early childhood age, that there are kids that are coming in, they're growing and changing at such a rapidly different stages that we kind of give them till age 8 to like say this is where every kid's supposed to be. So that gives all the kids the opportunity to learn and grow during that time frame. And it makes sure that we are giving kids instruction kind of along the way. Not that we don't continue to give instruction, but we want those kind of basics kind of along that way. And the way we have it set up is through student perception data. You know, kindergarten, first and second graders aren't quite ready to make the student perception of their SEL skills. Is that?
Mrs. Bell, did you have something else you wanted to ask?
I just wanted to, I guess, so are you saying our SEL is measured by student perception data?
So it's a survey that students take that's very indicative of all the 5 different domains. There's very specific questions that students rate themselves and their ability on. And so that's the information that we use to identify, well, where do students see themselves? Then teachers kind of look at, is that where I see them? And they start to have those conversations.
And where are we, I heard it discussed that we're looking at some various studies, but also the Johns Hopkins for various benchmarks. How are we doing? Where are we basing our SEL benchmarks from?
Those are currently in the research, and they haven't necessarily said by 3rd grade, it needs to be this, by 5th grade. They've just kind of said, these are the skills students need. So the reason we've kind of set it up the way we did was to make sure that at each level, we stop, double check to make sure where students are. Again, we're monitoring that all the time. We're thinking about, is it leveraged towards that big goal to make sure that the things we have in place are there and is working.
So that's also from Johns Hopkins? I'm just confused. Where are we pulling those standards or benchmarks from?
They're not necessarily related to the research in Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
It has to do with the fact that we as a state have social emotional learning benchmarks that we're responsible for teaching. So we want to make sure that we're accounting for those kind of along the way. There is research that's currently being done to identify what are those SEL skills that are predictive of students being successful in college. So it's not done yet. So those aren't anywhere. So we work to place them strategically in places that would allow us to kind of get a high leverage look to see if kids were on track.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question related to 8th grade. The proficiency in Algebra 1 sticks out to me because that is currently not a standard class for 8th grade. So that would indicate to me that we're looking to do a major shift, I guess, in our curriculum, in our strategy around math, even in middle school. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. That is one of our state indicators of success. And there's significant research that says that Algebra 1 is kind of like a gateway for students as it relates to high school success, which is important. And then you'll see at the high school, we've got Algebra 2 listed by junior year.
Right.
And that has also been shown through the research to be highly predictive. Like students who finish that by junior year are 4 times as likely to finish college. So that's why that's there.
Yeah, and the algebra 2 definitely makes sense. It ends up being a graduation requirement, and it's in existence today. But I guess my point for 8th grade is the Algebra 1 is considered an accelerated course. And so this would tell me that we're really looking to drive that, or maybe have a couple different levels of algebra for 8th grade students, or how are you looking at that yet? Or do you know?
I don't know that I have a good answer for that yet. I think as I'm still kind of getting into the system and really understanding, I do think we want to acknowledge that that is important. And we want to make sure that we are offering that to every student that can be successful.
Right.
Well, and I think there's a couple of components. One is, if you look at what is considered standard eighth grade math now, that a majority of what is now represented in this eighth grade standards is Algebra 1 content. As the state has realigned the standards, there's a significant chunk in what we teach in eighth grade that would be considered Algebra 1. At the same time, because we know that it's a gateway to advanced mathematics, I think the reason we've identified this as a goal is this is another time and place very similar to the grade 3 ELA or literacy research, that there's significant research about students that this is predictive. Whether or not a student is able to complete Algebra 1 by eighth grade is predictive of that college and career readiness. So as a district, if we look at our percentages of students that are in Algebra 1, I think it's low.
Right.
And so because I think it's low, I think it's important that number one, we recognize that there's research around this target, around this of Algebra 1 in eighth grade. And then number two, then I think we need to then begin to develop a strategy to get more students there by the time that they finish eighth grade. So that includes, I mean, we can look at the pathway that we have now for kids that end up in Algebra 1 in eighth grade, because there's a plan for them in sixth, and then there's compacted 7, 8, and 7, and then there's Algebra 1 in eighth grade. I think we're going to need our math teachers and our learning and teaching department to look at that for us, to help us really understand how do we get more kids there and ready. What I don't want to do, and I've seen this done before, where overnight a district has said, oh, you're in eighth grade, now you're in Algebra 1. That's not the right approach. We want to build, we want to make sure that as we help kids ramp up through their middle school math experience, that they're ready for that content when they get to eighth grade.
Well, yeah, certainly. And well, I'm sorry, Mr. One final. I think I agree with everything you're saying. I just don't want to lose sight. If we as a board and leadership team expertise agree that one of the key indicators for us is Algebra 1 in eighth grade, I appreciate that some of it is embedded in the advanced math, 7th, 8th grade merged and that type of thing. But then I feel if we agree that that's the goal, then we should put a strategy in place to hit that.
I would agree with.
Okay.
What I am saying to you though, too, is if let's say it's 35% this year of our eighth graders are in algebra, or eighth grade students complete Algebra 1 by eighth grade, by the end of eighth grade, next year it won't be 85. Probably we're going to have to get there, because we really they need support in their math experience in 6th and 7th grade to be ready for the eighth grade standards. Because when we talk about Algebra 1 in eighth grade, we're not talking about algebra content, which is what's in the eighth grade current standard curriculum. We're talking about the actual Algebra 1
High school math,
course.
right.
Yeah, for high school credit.
Right. Well, and I would suggest, and that was the basis of my original question, I would suggest there's going to have to be work done, right, to re-engineer 6th and 7th grade, and potentially even 4th and 5th grade elementary. I don't know, to get them ready so that for eighth grade, Algebra 1 becomes more of the standard. Okay.
Dr. Pearson, would you also, I'm sorry, Mr. McNally, and real quick, would you also talk about kind of nationally Algebra 1 and where it is, maybe in other states?
Yeah, I would say that nationally, it's pretty standard now that a majority of students are experiencing Algebra 1 at the end of eighth grade. I think that's the best way to simplify it, and have been now for some time. So this would not be a new area for us or a new target, which is one of the reasons why Common Core, when they redid the state standards using the Common Core standards as a foundation, much of the content now in eighth grade standard math is technically algebraic concepts.
It's going to be really important that we're keeping an eye on our silos then. Yeah. To make sure that we're getting our kids to that level, if that's the goal.
Mr. McNally, sorry, I
So-
jumped in there on this.
This kind of points out with a point that Mrs. McCabe made, because for somebody to be ready for Algebra 1 in eighth grade, they have to be ready for 7th grade, 6th grade, down to 3rd grade. So I think that makes that point more important. I have a couple questions kind of regarding that, and I'm going to toss them all out there, and maybe you can, between the two of you, answer. So do we know right now what percentage of our eighth graders take it? And I can't recall, I should know because I was on the committee when we started doing this, but how long it's been offered and what's been the trajectory of increase of students, and are we looking to ramp that up? And what's the average for the state and our ultimate goal? So, and I'll repeat any one of those questions. Bye.
Yeah, I would say that we run about 35 to 40% of our students that take Algebra 1 in 8th grade, kind of up and, up plus or minus here and there. I don't have that specific. I don't have the, yeah. So I would say that we have students that are doing it. Like Dr. Pearson said, should we be working to have more students do that? I would absolutely agree with that.
Is that 35% roughly that have finished it by the end of 8th grade?
They must,
or that they are in it in 8th grade?
They must earn a C in their 8th grade year. Like they would have to have taken it in 8th grade and they have to earn a C to be counted as part of the accountability.
But is it just in 8th grade year, or kids that are in AT that have taken Algebra 1 at a
I understand.
prior year?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So make sure I heard it right. 35% have taken it by the end of 8th grade year, no matter which year they took it. And you said the state was 31%? Okay, thank you so much.
So I'll kind of repeat the other, and the crux of my point is how long have we offered it and what has been the trajectory of increase? I can't recall how many years we've offered 8th grade, and you may not know that, but it's something that I think it'd be important to know.
Yeah, so we've offered both geometry and Algebra 1 in middle school for high school credit as long as I've been in the district. So it's been now, this is my 12th year. And I think it was probably in place before that, Mr. Moore. For sure in 1989.
I know we made a big push a few years back.
So when we redid the middle school math curriculum, and that's what you're remembering,
That's what I'm sure.
They clarified the pathways to make sure that there weren't gaps for students that ended up in Algebra 1. And so that's where we ended up with that 6th grade and then 7th and 8th grade compacted, or I think there's also a 6th and 7th grade compacted that allows students to move more quickly through the middle school curriculum to get to those higher level math classes at the high school, or the high school level math classes at middle school.
All right. So in recent years, have we had an increase in the number of students that are taking that course? I guess
we would have to.
Okay.
Committed to is to ensure that students are on the right path. And we also wanted to make sure that there was a possibility for students to move up or down between pathways based on the student performance at the time.
Okay, one quick question. I don't want to get all into the weeds, but I want to make sure that if we're going to work towards increasing the total overall percentage of kids in having proficiency in Algebra 1, we're going to need a plan to get there. I know other people kind of said this. We're going to need a plan to get there, because right now, I know having kids in AT, the setting those standards happens through this complicated mathematical matrix that starts in 3rd grade.
Absolutely.
And if we're that has to change in 3rd grade. So we're looking at an 8th grade benchmark, but it really needs to start 5 years prior, because otherwise, how are you going to get to that goal? And I know that it's pretty hard to get a kid, a student, speaking from a parent's point of view, that it's difficult to get the student tested. And I'm hoping that's changing, but I know that can be difficult from the parent perspective or the student. So I just want to really make sure that you don't have to go into a detailed explanation about how we're going to do it, but we need to make sure we're addressing it at the third grade level.
Sure. So just so that, yes, of course. And part of this is by doing that, it's forcing us to look, right? This is set up to make sure that we're leveraging our EC through 12 system to put students on track to meet the things that we need them to meet. And also, like, we're looking for feedback about if this is the right way to go. Once we have that feedback, then we develop the plans for how we're going to get there. And I absolutely agree that the only way to do that is for us to look at our whole system and make decisions about what comes next.
And that's also going to include, sorry, that's also going to need to include, we have to change or make sure that we have the support systems for that in place, meaning enough spots for an AT teacher to be there in the elementary setting. So they're ready for those advanced classes in middle school, and allowing kids the ability, like Dr. Pearson said, to move up and down. That was one of the challenges I found within the system when my kids they're in high school and beyond, but when they were in the elementary level, that was a big challenge.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That would all go into, my goal is to make sure every kid is successful, and whatever that looks like and however we need to do that, we will make that happen.
And Mrs. Bell, I think just to your point there, the idea with this particular benchmark or target, it is to remove some of that gatekeeping. Like, we only have room for this many students. So that's what we're going to take we're going to lop it off here, where a student may be ready, but maybe they don't have the score is, one less than the other. So it's partially, we're going to see that they have the ability to take this course. It's just the course. It's what you do in 8th grade. So I think that's important. Does anyone else have anything else they would like to add or ask about this before I go into my questions? Okay. So I do have a question about the focus is on ELA and mathematics, and also looking at students who are proficient in English and so on. I was wondering about writing. I know I had brought that up.
So within the ELA, writing is taken into account. So as part of the IAR assessment, there's writing components that we're able to monitor over time, as well as in the SAT, though this past year they didn't do any writing, but my understanding is that will continue, that will be back in place moving forward.
Okay. And so when we look at on track, at 3rd grade and 5th grade, we're also looking at writing as well.
Correct. That's part of that component. Yes.
Because, I'm okay with obviously that achievement part, but how are we monitoring the progress or student growth within writing ELA?
I would say that we have some, what we call kind of on-demand assessments that our teachers are giving kind of along the way. I would say that we have some opportunity to kind of standardize that a little bit and help teachers utilize that data in the same way that they might utilize their iReady data in that same manner.
Okay. I would like to see maybe that put in specifically so that there is an understanding that we are looking not only at the achievement portion, but we're looking at the student progress and some of those on-demand pieces for writing. In our 3-year lag measures, we have one, and I know we're going to put those targets in, but increase the percentage of students with an SAT score of 1100 or above. Dr. Pearson, you mentioned that we were also going to look at the composite as well, but I don't see that written. I see it as an increase in the percentage of students who are reaching that composite. Is that going to include looking at just the composite where that is our score?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of rethought this is draft language. I think we've rethought that, and I think we want to do, as a team, we want to look at the components separately. So we want to see math and ELA. I mean, for example, a student could score really, have a really high math score and a relatively low ELA score. Well, we want to know that, because then that means we probably need to be thoughtful about, what we're doing to ensure the readiness around that. So we want to disaggregate it by subscores, and we want to set targets around the subscores, and then we want to set a composite target. And we haven't really decided yet if we're going to do it based on the progression. So like where they were on their PSAT, and then hoping that they reach a certain SAT benchmark, because remember, these are cohorts of students and they're only taking this test at one moment in time. So one way would be to try to set a growth target for a group of students based on their PSAT data, which should be predictive of their SAT data. And then, of course, over time, we want to continue to see increases. But if you look, like, for example, a couple of years ago, we had what was the highest performing group of students that we've had come through our district in a long time, just as a group of students. Their score was significantly higher than the class the year before them, and it was significantly higher than the class that came after them. So we would have seen a drop in scores from those groups, but all of those groups were progressing in their score over time. So as they moved from 9th grade to 10th grade and 10th grade to 11th grade, we saw those scores increasing. So it's going to be a matter of figuring out how we want to set that particular benchmark, whether we want to watch the cohort or whether or not we want to just have a cut score. And I think from our perspective, we would want to monitor the subscores by cohort to ensure that we're seeing that score increase over time.
Just to interject there, I guess my thought, I would like to see the cut score too, because I think they tell different things. Okay.
I was actually thinking about that taco commercial where they said, why not both? So
I agree with both.
why not both?
Yeah.
Taco sounds good. Okay. So my other question was, when we talk about some of this like draft, like lead actions, where does fitting in, there's a lot of maybe some reorganization or strategy around things. Where does it fit in for, the structure of L&T, talking about the coordinators, talking about department chairs, that of a long time ago. How does that all fit in?
So that would be something we would have kind of under that planning and evaluating, where we're taking a look to see, part of it is waiting to see what comes out of a portrait of a graduate, what comes out of that strategic plan, to see how things need to align and what that needs to look like, as well as taking a look at, do we need those coordinators? Do we not? We're doing some of that, and department chairs that's like in that planning and evaluating.
Okay. And when, and this is actions that'll be taking place this year. So this is, the expectation is that structure will
Yes.
be, come to the board table this year.
Yes, around the coordinators, yes, and the department chairs, yes.
I have a clarifying question. We spoke earlier about how these indicators don't have the quantitative numbers on them for the 1, 2, and 3-year tracking, and that we'll see that later. How is that going to roll out? Can you just go over the time frame again?
So we'll go back now, once we agree that these are the right indicators, and go ahead and populate the data that we have available. And as soon as we're able to share it publicly, so some of it's IAR, some of it's iReady, we'll bring back the whole spreadsheet to the board to see.
And how are you going to create your goal numbers?
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we'll start with where we are, what's our current state. And then ideally, I call these aspirational, in that we would want every student to get there, right? Our end goal is 100%, that every student gets to and hits these indicators. And so we'll start with where's our current state, and then we'll make slow increments all the way.
So like,
we're not going to have 100%.
well,
in
no,
3
I know
years.
it's not. So I guess the board's feedback at that point. So if we're not getting data back until November L&T. So for the board to say, we want to see proficiency at, 75% for 9 through 12, for instance, or SAT, jump 100 points in 3 years. Is that when we'll be talking about the bread and butter in November?
And honestly, with the way that the data is made available publicly every year, I think that has to become your cycle. You've really got to understand that you're going to finally see the data in November every year, and you're going to set new targets based on that data, because we don't have any other way to have that conversation as long as the state embargoes that data through October the 31st, which they do,
Right,
for the state report card purposes.
Yeah.
So that would be our hope, is
Okay.
that's just the time every year that you're revisiting that and setting those targets.
Okay.
Does that include the iReady data?
No, it does not include iReady. iReady is district data. So
Okay,
we
so
we could bring that sooner, but it needs to be aggregated, right? So that we're kind of looking at performance across multiple measures. But we certainly can bring iReady before that, but for sure, we can't see IAR data until November.
Okay. Can I ask one more question? Are you intending with the goals to include an aspirational goal as well, or what are you thinking?
I guess, for me, this is like on track. This is what it would look like. Our goal is every student, right? So that's aspirational, that we're talking about every student. I don't anticipate having a goal like 3 years from now that every student is there. I think it's really important that we understand our current state and we set a goal that's reasonable and achievable. Because if it's too high, people shut down, right? I can't get there. It's not doable. So we've got the Goldilocks kind of rule of finding what's a stretch, but yet achievable goal, and kind of working, in segments across time.
I think the other piece of data that will be important is that the state will have for us targets based on whether or not we meet expected growth each year. So we'll be expected to move groups of students a certain percentage each year from year to year. And so they kind of have a matrix of that. And so we'll be looking at that matrix of like, well, where are we expected to be? Like, where do we have to make sure we get students in this particular group? And then we'll be using that information to inform those targets as well. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to just mention this, because this is always one of our challenges as a district. This is the last year for IAR in its current state.
Right, and then there'll be something else.
As you well know, the state is changing their assessment next year. And at this moment, they still don't know what it's going to be. They just had a presentation last week at the state board meeting where they put parameters in place for what the new assessment might look like. I think there are some positive possibilities, including that there could very well be a formative component to it, so that it's not always postmortem, but that instead it's something that teachers maybe have information about where their current students are, very similar to how we use an iReady test, but just know that they're still in the development phase. And so we'll be, as we start to set these targets, we'll be moving to a new state assessment as well next year.
So let's get, serious about that. Are we going to be really relying on our iReady and PSAT and SAT data for the most part, since we're going to be following the bouncing ball again with Illinois?
Well, we can't ignore the accountability piece that comes with the state
IAR.
assessment, right? But at the same time, I think from a formative standpoint and from a practical standpoint for teachers, iReady for elementary and middle school is a better tool. It gives them just-in-time information about where students are. I think the PSAT suite of assessments will continue to inform our programming at the high school. So yes, both of those are tools that are probably, they will be more stable for us as we make this transition.
Thank you.
Okay, are we, at this time, are we done with our questions for innovative learning? Okay. So I think it makes sense for us to take a short recess before we move on to the other 3 areas. So let's be back in about 5 to 7 minutes.
the issue that involves you. Yes, thank you.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Where'd she go? She was just here. Okay. It is 7:28 and the board is back from recess. Okay, Dr. Pearson, would you like to continue on to our next commitment?
Yes. So I am happy to recognize that Mr. Attaway and Mr. Baird are here to help walk us through the responsible stewardship slides. It's the same structure, but because these are not necessarily tied to student percentages or proficient, the way it's organized is just a little bit different. Mr. Attaway.
So the success indicators that we identified for responsible stewardship are safe and highly effective learning environments, resource allocation that supports student learning growth and the district's budgetary priorities, and efficient systems that support and enhance the strategic and academic goals of the district. So in the responsible stewardship section, we really identified that business services and operations play a supporting role in the school district, that innovative learning and the work that learning and teaching do really take center stage. And the work that we do is a lot of behind the scenes and just supporting students and staff and allowing them to do what they do best. Next slide.
Part of the 3-year targets that we look at is presently we're finishing up the facility study, but we're trying to create a comprehensive facility improvement plan that will include that master facility plan that we'll be bringing forward soon and align that with our 5-year capital plan, with our preventive maintenance programs that we do each and every year, and then look into our 10-year health life safety plan and make sure that all 3 of those all work together.
We also want to make sure that, can you go back a slide, please? Thank you. We also want to make sure that at the end of the 3 years, we have the budgeting process set up in such a way that we're able to easily and clearly identify expenditures that support both short-term and long-term educational outcomes. So I think, we have a very comprehensive budgeting process here at the district, and there's a lot of conversation internally and then at the board level publicly. But I think sometimes what can be lost is that direct connection between the budget and the classroom. So really what we're looking for at the end of the 3 years is being very clear in our articulation about where in the budget those student outcomes lie. And then the other 3-year target that we've included is developing administrative procedures that clearly outline purchasing, bid, and RFQ processes. So currently we do have internal processes for purchasing, and there are board policies related to purchasing in the district. But really what we're looking at is developing a comprehensive set of guidelines for each category and everything that the district would be procuring, just so we have transparent processes. And there really is no question that if we're bringing forward new curriculum or if we're bringing forward a bid for copy paper, that there was a process that was followed and it is very clearly identified.
And then one of the first 2021-2022 annual outcomes, we're sort of looking at the completion of the priority projects that are identified in the master facility plan brought before the Board of Education, with an emphasis on building capacity and looking at some of those numbers across the district so our buildings can support the student enrollment that's identified.
Also, the board has identified the importance of maintaining a 4.0 financial profile score, as well as an adequate fund balance as dictated by board policy between 28 and 34%. What we've also included in this is making sure that our annual budget allocations meet the academic and curriculum needs while maintaining those fiscal targets that we have. So part of that will be done this year by periodic check-ins between the business office and learning and teaching, just to monitor the budget and the year-to-date activities. And really that would serve two purposes. Number one, to make sure that learning and teaching has what they need to support students, but also to make sure that it would allow time for mid-year adjustments to make sure that we end the year well. And then the other two annual outcomes that we have, one would be to review the evidence-based funding metrics and identify areas for, can you go back one? Sorry. And identify potential improvements or opportunities for efficiency. So right now, District 303 is at 100% adequacy according to the state, but it would be very important to go through the exercise of still comparing the district metrics to the 26 points that are identified in EBF, just to make sure that we're in line. And in areas where there are some differences, start asking questions as to why. And there could be very good reasons as to why we don't line up in certain areas. Maybe we've chosen to put additional resources in certain areas beyond what EBF is suggesting, but that would give us an opportunity to start asking those questions and give us kind of a framework to start working through. And then the final annual outcome that we've identified is a thorough review of current vendor and professional service contracts. So we have internally already started to put together a 10-year schedule that lays out the bids, RFQs, and RFPs for every single year for the next 10 years. And that is really to start giving us an opportunity to plan and to start looking forward to make sure that we're lining things up in the future correctly and to make sure that we're maintaining efficiency. So for example, right now, K-8 and 9-12 food service are separate. There may be an opportunity in future years, just look at combining those two to maintain more efficiency and to bring better service to the district. That is a potential opportunity that we have that we would be looking at on a schedule such as that. And I believe that is the end of the responsible stewardship section, and we're happy to take any questions.
So I think we're in a similar place as we were with the on-track indicators for innovative learning. Are there pieces that you feel like we should be identifying as a goal area that are not represented in the goals that we've laid out for you this evening?
I can say I don't have anything to add at this time, but I do want to say I appreciate the way it was explained regarding expenditures that support both educational short and long-term outcomes, really connecting the budget to the classroom. I think actually, Mr. Lackner, you had talked about that at one point, but I really think that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so we have, thank you for the comprehensive presentation. We have talked financial schedule before. What was I think we've done a 5-year. So are you looking to extend it from a 5-year projection to 10-year?
So currently there's a 5-year fully comprehensive financial projection that looks at expenditures and revenues and projects them going forward. What we're putting together right now is simply a procurement schedule where we're looking at when we're bidding out food service or custodial copy paper. So just so we can start lining things up to maximize efficiency.
Okay, the procurement. The only thing that I would maybe want to see spliced out in particular is what we started talking about in regard to the board decisions when it comes to the fund balance or any other bonds that we might have to look at in the projected 3, 5, 10. So because the turnover in boards, it might be good to know for the community and for whoever sits on the board what the cycle will be in a projected out timeline of what major financial decisions that board might have to make in changing any of those bonds or or funds whatsoever. So I think that's something that's kind of organically happened, but it would be nice to have that kind of also in the schedule. It's something that we've kind of organically done with Dr. Chapman and yourself as you've come on, where we looked at, with Thompson, what it would look like without, wanting to make sure we don't do a referendum and wanting to do the facility utilization plan changes and upgrades, whatever's coming down the pike without having to impact our taxpayers. And anything we could do in the future to impact our taxpayers, obviously in the opposite direction. We've done, not rebates, Dr. Pearson, what are they called? Are they rebates? When we've given abatements, thank you. I had a little brain fart there, sorry. When we've done abatements back to our taxpayers, I think opportunities for those, any of that, I think would be a good discussion for current board members and new board members to talk about projections. So I think when it comes to the decision-making of board members. So if you could roll that in there, I don't know, what do you think? Is that good? Yeah.
We can, yes, we can add some of that to what we're doing.
Okay.
here.
I just think that that's a hard thing for a new board member or board member, someone in the community that wants to run for the board to kind of wrap their head around when they first land on the board. So, all right, thanks.
One thing that's not contemplated in what you shared is a financial reaction to the facilities master plan. There's an awful lot that was covered in the last presentation associated with it. And so it might be, I think some of what Ms. Weidel's getting at is associated with the potential expense associated with any of the goals in that plan. And so as we mature thinking around the plan, making sure that our stewardship goals align with whatever those physical plant and large capital investments look like, come together well.
Absolutely. And as we're right now planning to bring that back to the board in October. And part of that will be looking at different, let's call them buckets of potential projects and having a discussion with the board on what the priorities are and which direction the board would like us to go with that master facility plan. And that will help inform potential financial strategy that we can look at moving forward.
Is there anything else about our responsible stewardship? No? Okay, let's move on to our next commitment. Quality, is it quality staff?
Yes, we're going to invite Mr. Moore to the microphone to walk us through this section.
All right, good evening. Thank you. Just like with responsible stewardship, this section is modeled under theirs versus the innovative learning style. So you'll see that on our slides. So we identified 3 success indicators. One is employee contracts, policies, procedures, expectations that support the development and retention of high quality staff. So we've had the attract and retain high quality staff as a district and a board goal for as long as I can remember. This is really that same idea, but what allows there to be a high quality staff? So these are some of the indicators that lead to that. Of course, we want employment and recruitment practices that consistently identify and attract high quality staff. And then this one is new. All staff understand their role and responsibilities and work in support of the district's learning outcomes. That in no way says that people aren't doing that work now, but we haven't been, and you'll see on another slide, very consistent with definitive expectations for various roles within the district for a long time. Next slide. So just like with responsible stewardship, we identified 3-year targets. One is, of course, the ratified professional agreements that are comparable and competitive with similar suburban K-12 districts. As you know, all 3 of our professional agreements expire at some point over the upcoming summer. So we will be engaging in the work of bargaining with the associations. I think as a board, we'll start that conversation, I would think next month, which is typically when we start talking about it as a board. The next one says establish an evidence-based hiring system. The last time we reviewed our hiring process was 8 years ago. When I first entered human resources, Dr. Allison and I rewrote the process, but we haven't adjusted it since. It's time to take a good look at how we go through the hiring process and see what we can improve upon. Establishing a system for regular review of job descriptions and job responsibilities. We don't have a system for reviewing periodically and on a routine basis the job descriptions that we do have. And there are some positions that we don't have job descriptions for, so we'll need to establish those. And then finally, establishing training and professional growth system for non-licensed employees. We have a very robust professional learning system that really is targeted towards teachers and the licensed staff. We really need a better way of extending that to our support staff. They continue to ask, rightfully so, for more training and more education for themselves, so we should be in a better position to provide that. Next page. Identified some outcomes for this year. I think the most important, as usual, is to have ratified agreements before school starts next year, but that's dependent upon the bargaining process. I will, with a team, review the hiring practices and recommend changes for our administrators to implement. We'll establish a process for reviewing job descriptions and responsibilities for this year, and then use that process in the years going forward, and then work with learning and teaching on setting up an effective training program for the non-licensed staff. Those are my slides.
I have a question. Is it possible that the board can be provided with what the definition of similar pre-K through 12 districts are that we're going to use? And then that
Absolutely.
would be a baseline that we.
Yes,
Okay.
we've had a common list in agreement with the association for at least 5 bargaining rounds now, but we'll discuss that when we go through our bargaining prep.
Okay.
Yep.
Go ahead, Mr. Lieutenant.
Thank you for the presentation. You talked about the licensed professional learning system as being rather robust. How can we get a measurement associated with the amount and the quality of the training that takes place, especially as it aligns with the measures of academic success that were shared in the presentation on innovative learning? So as we focus on ELA or math, how do we look at the participation rate and the quality of training associated with those areas, particularly around either those benchmark points or the periods of time leading up to the benchmark points?
I think part of that question could be answered very quickly, the quantity and those numbers. Pam Jensen is our director of instruction who is responsible for that. She is in the learning and teaching department. We do have that information of like how many people participate each summer, which courses do they take, and so on. Dr. Pearson and Dr. Igo can work with Pam Jensen on pulling that information out. And then I think the second part of your question was, how does that connect to our goals for math and reading? Is that correct? Okay. So I don't have an answer for you now, but it is something we can get together.
As we think about the interplay between budget and training and those goals, having some clear view of where we're investing training dollars in order to achieve those goals, I think will be an important one for us, both from a budget review standpoint, but also from a participation and evaluation, how we think about what it means to do a good job.
And I would go a step further and say, I don't know if we have a clear process for evaluation that is standardized across the whole district, because I know everything is different depending on department and grade and what have you.
Are you saying evaluation of employees or evaluation of programs?
Of employees.
We do. Teachers have a very well-defined teacher evaluation program that applies to everybody. And we do also have a well-defined support staff evaluation plan that's not as intense as the teacher evaluation plan, and it doesn't need to be, but we do have very well-defined evaluation plans. The teacher one is in line with state requirements.
That was actually one, I want to tie to that question. I wondered where we are in terms of evaluation process? Is it making a difference? Are we feeling good about what our principals are able to do? Is the feedback? Or I don't know what the district has done in the last 5 to 6 years. So
Sure.
I just wondered.
So the evaluation committee, which is chaired, I think, by Dr. Igo now with Joe Blomquist. It's a joint committee as defined by the state para law. Reviews the plan every year and makes suggestions for improvement. Now, just kind of like with student growth and student data, we're getting back into more normal school this year. So teacher evaluation was paused for last year and the year before as a formal structure, and now it's back in place. So I think we'll see once this year's evaluations come around, what's changed. Just in general, there's the idea of non-tenured evaluation compared to tenured evaluation. There's once you're tenured, you're presumed to continue to work. So evaluation there is mostly for feedback and improvement. For non-tenure, it's feedback and improvement and the decision of, do you get to work here next year or not? We do use it for that purpose. And I have yet to have a year as a HR director where we haven't identified some number of non-tenured teachers as not moving on for the following year.
Ask a piggyback to Ms. McCabe's question, just to clarify. It's a great question. And I guess my question is in comparison to other districts, have we added on any tools that may be working for other districts? Are we in some kind of sharing program with those districts on how to improve or?
Sure. I don't know what the evaluation committee has looked at.
Yeah.
I'm not on the committee, so I take what they come up
Right.
with and implement it. But so I don't have an answer to your question.
I think that would be interesting for a goal to see that committee.
So here's what I would suggest. It sounds like there's several new people at the table that really don't understand what our system is now. So I think it would be good for us to maybe bring back information about the evaluation system that we have currently. And then perhaps at that point, we can take some feedback about maybe areas or places where you think we might need to work or focus or improve. I would hesitate to identify it as a short-term goal for this year.
Yeah.
Prior to having that conversation.
Right. And not being new, I'm not sure that I fully understand the process. I'm not sure that we've had it as a full A through Z step presentation in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't recall ever doing that presentation.
Yeah. And I think it would be nice to see what they've learned, who they're talking to, what they think is successful, what maybe they want to work on themselves. Because I know that the teachers in the district and administration staff are always evolving. And so I'm sure they're identifying pieces they want to work on too. That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. We've been seeing reports for a few years now, and certainly after a pandemic that's still going on, the concern about the teacher shortage is growing. And so, we're looking at numbers of students who are enrolling in teacher preparation just continuing to go down. What strategy or where do I see or can we look at strategies that are going to make us really the shining star that the smaller pool of teachers are going to want to choose?
I don't think you see any specific strategies to that in this. We are fortunate to have a very strong relationship with Northern already. And many of their student teachers who come to us, we end up hiring. We take student teachers from lots of different schools, and it seems to get wider every year. We used to be more selective on the colleges we would accept student teachers from, but we've gotten more expansive because the number coming from any one school is less, as you said. So we want to keep up our numbers, but also the more colleges that we accept their students from, the more chance the students there know who we are basically. So you certainly don't see anything directly about that in the slides. We are fortunate that we continue to fill nearly all of our positions every year, with the always exception of something like autos and woods, which is virtually impossible to find. And we're short a one-day art teacher right now. But so far, people are coming here over some other places. That doesn't mean that will continue.
I will say though, to your point, I think it falls under the success indicator of employment and recruitment practices that consistently identify and attract high quality staff. I do think that there are areas that we every year kind of hold our breath to hope that we're going to have enough staff show up to work in that category. So for example, bilingual teachers is often an area that we are concerned about whether or not we're able to recruit enough staff members. And I know that this is consistent with some of the challenges that other districts in our area face. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, do we have a strategy, or can we begin to develop a strategy around some of those hard to hire areas that we know are out there, either based on just the candidate pool that's available, or areas that we often are challenged? I can say, for example, school psychologists is an area that previously we had some challenge in filling all of those positions. And Dr. Pelagi intentionally built some partnerships with some university programs. We tried to have some more externships in our district to make sure that we were having access to people who were coming out of school psychology programs. And I think we've seen improvement there. So identifying maybe some specific areas where we potentially might have challenges, and then some strategy around that, I think would be a good starting point. But what you mentioned would probably fall under that second success indicator.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see some, not only just for the hard to hire areas, especially for the hard to hire areas, I guess, but also starting to put some thoughts together about how we're going to plan for the future. Because it's in the next, 4 to 5 years, it's going to be harder and harder unless something changes.
The other thing is to layer on that as well. I think it would be important as part of our analysis and setting strategy, bringing back to the board an understanding of what the state is doing to address this, and also on the national level, if there are best practices from other states or districts that we can employ in that type of thing. So.
I'm going by my memory, so it could not be accurate. Did we not bump into some issues because we only had one teacher who was certificated to teach at the high school level when we had to go remote or hybrid? I kind of remember a conversation that we needed more cross certification.
There are some subject areas where that's an unsolvable problem. Latin is the best example. We don't have enough kids who take Latin to ever have 2 Latin teachers. We don't have enough to have 1 Latin teacher right now. So fortunately, she also teaches Spanish. But we want to continue to offer those programs. So it's like in that kind of position, it's not feasible to hire another person to teach Latin. German is another good example of that. So there's some very specialized courses that you can't back up staff for. That's a small group. Those foreign languages, autos, that's about it. But in your core areas, like in math, anybody who teaches math can teach anything in math. It can legally teach anything in math. Doesn't necessarily mean they want to or feel they're qualified to teach calculus, for example, but they could. So in the core areas, it's almost never a problem. It's really in those very specific specialized courses.
I would want to add that, just to keep on the radar, that when requirements changed and we were allowed to give high school credit at the middle school level, that was an issue. So just making sure that we have that covered for those kinds of issues, not just math, but anything that might happen in that way where we are right now, it's foreign language and math, correct?
Yes.
So making sure that is something that we have either backup of or options is something that comes to my head when you're saying any math teacher can teach anything. Sure, maybe at the high school level, but definitely not in the middle school level. And that's something that I want to just be sure is on, your radar, and probably is, but.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I should point out in the same vein that the state has changed the licensing rules multiple times in the last 10 years. And a really good example is elementary. Now, Ms. McCabe, forever, you would have a K through 9 teacher, which could teach anything in elementary school. Well, the K-9 license no longer exists. So you can be either a birth to grade 3 or a 1 through 6. So now the 1 through 6 cannot teach kindergarten in a K-5 school. So there are those kinds of things that the state hands to us that we have to make work. Now that change itself isn't that big of a deal because it's only going forward. One of the other things of the licensing rules is once you as an individual are licensed to teach something, you're licensed to teach that forever until you decide to quit, regardless of what the rules are. So like the K birth to 3 versus 1 to 6 rule is for new people. So right now it's not a big deal because we have lots of existing people, but in 15 years, it'll be a big deal. That's one example of various licensing rules that continue to change.
Any other questions or comments on quality staff? No? Okay, moving
Thank you.
on to community relations.
Thank you and good evening. I think it's very purposeful that community relations is last because our department touches all the departments that you've heard from tonight. And we want to talk a little bit about our success indicators. We want to make sure that community members understand the district's commitments and outcomes. And you heard Mr. Attaway talk a little bit about those connections. So if our department can help the community understand what those connections are between the boardroom and the classroom, between the budget and the classroom. We also want to partner with the community to build the collective vision about learning experiences in District 303. And it's not just about telling the stories about the achievement of our students and our staff members in our district, but also bringing our community into that conversation. It's important, as Mr. Moore is talking about quality staff, that our staff members also understand and engage in the district's learning outcomes. We want them to be able to participate in the process, and we want them to be able to articulate what's happening in their classrooms and in their schools. Our 3-year targets, increasing the level of transparency between the district and the community. When we think about some of the ways that we want to do that this coming year, it's the facility master plan spending. We've talked about that a little bit. The achievement data. When Dr. Igo talks about all of the things that are happening in the learning and teaching department, our department has to be able to articulate those in a way that our community can understand and appreciate. And again, it's also those connections. We want to provide our stakeholders with opportunities to learn about and engage in the district mission, vision, program, services, and use of resources. And we talk about, here are our members, some of them who are left tonight and some of them who are watching from the Citizen Advisory Committee. What a better way to be able to bring those stakeholders into the conversation. And they're people that are from all walks of life. We have one gentleman here who has no children in our district. He's lived here for 2 years. Then we have Mr. Mullally, who said, what did he graduate? 30 children, when he talks about not only his own children, but the children that he has from the exchange program. And he's been in our district over 20 years. So we want to bring in all of those voices, all of those experiences to have those conversations with us and engage in that work. We're looking forward to doing the equity audit and how our department can support that, how our Citizen Advisory Committee can support that. And also with the facility master plan. The Citizen Advisory Committee did so much work on that over the last year and a half, but as Mr. Baird will tell you, it's not over yet. We have to continue to have those conversations, and we have to continue to bring people in to talk about what's best for the facility usage in our district. And with the strategic planning implementation, Dr. Pearson talked a little bit about this with the portrait of a graduate. And again, it's not only about pushing information out. When we, if you recall, we had the communications audit that started just a little over a year or a little over a year ago. And one of the things that they talked about was making sure that we were providing information to our community members who don't have children in our district, who may not be on social media, who may not be watching the board meetings. So what are the opportunities that we're giving them to push out the information so that they can consume it the way that they need to consume it? And we'll talk a little bit about that in the 1 year targets. So again, it's not only about pushing out that information, but also bringing people in to have those conversations. So when we talk about what our annual outcomes are going to be, this year, we're going to be writing, producing, and distributing 3 community publications. As you know, we typically do a fall focus, and we also do an annual report. But as, again, when we look back on the communications audit, one of the things that we learned is that it would be beneficial to be able to send out something in February. And this year, or in the coming year, what we've decided is by that time, there will be more comprehensive information about the facility master plan. That is something that we can talk about how we're going to fund it. By then, we may have some concrete ideas from the architect and from the CAC about the specific projects that we may be working on over the summer. And we can give that really the credit that it deserves to have an entire publication that's devoted just to the facility master plan. We're also going to be, whoops, I am on the wrong one, sorry. The fall focus is typically something where we can not only talk about what's happened since school began, but also some of the accomplishments that happened since the annual report came out in June. So we talk a lot about those spring and summer sports teams that have won. And we really put a lot of photos in there, a lot of stories about students, what they're doing since school began. And then in the summer, when we talk about the annual report, then that is really focused on the 4 strategic commitments that we've talked about tonight. We want to continue to utilize those established relationships that we have with print media. What I find is that very often our reporters are really, our print media reporters are really looking for a lot of information, and they're very supportive and have a tendency to print things the way when we send them to them. So we're going to be really more strategic about the information that we send. Again, that is a way that we can reach those community members who do not have children in our schools, who may not be getting the e-news, but they do get the newspaper on their step every morning. We also are going to strengthen our social media content quality and quantity. And that is not only about the amount of social media posts that we do, but also cross-posting. So making sure that when we have something that's happening in the school, that we are posting on not only on the district site, but also on the school site. Our principals are so busy, our teachers are so busy, but we know that that when someone from my staff or when I are out visiting schools, that we can certainly have that cross-posting, and we can certainly support them in that. We're going to continue to support the efforts of the Citizen Advisory Committee. I'm really excited to see that some of the new members came today. I'm excited to have our first meeting on Thursday. I met with some of our executive team members today to talk a little bit about what that meeting is going to look like on Thursday. I'll talk to you about that later. But we're really excited to bring all of those community members in and get started working for the 21-22 school year. And we've also been working on implementing a new staff structure in the communications department. This board has been very supportive of this department and the staffing needs of this department. I was very fortunate after my first year here that Dr. Pearson said, we're going to get you some more help. And we also know that next week at the board meeting on Monday, we're going to ask you to approve another position for the department. We have chosen someone to be in that, and we're going to bring that back to the board. So on behalf of my department, I just want to thank you so much for how you value the communication and how you've been supportive of what's happening in our department. Let's see, so next. Other things that we're going to be working on this year is the launching of the community engagement processes for the strategic plan. Dr. Pearson talked about that a little bit for the portrait of the graduate and the competencies, but also the equity work. So we're going to have focus groups. We're going to have the CAC work. There's probably going to be some survey work. Our department's going to work with whoever the audit company is to make sure that that process runs smoothly. We are also engaging outreach activities to staff members that encourage their participation. What I've always said, and I've been doing this job for 20 years in several different districts, is that communications and community relations might be in my title, but it is the responsibility of everyone in the district. And so I was actually talking to one of my staff members today, and I said, we need to make a schedule, and we're going to do this. And we are going to make sure that as a department, we are in all the buildings. We're visiting those schools. We're visible. We're talking to people. Because what I know about teachers is that they will say, I'm not doing anything special. I'm just doing my job. And we know that when I go and visit buildings, that I can go into 5 classrooms and I'll see 20 special things. And so that really has to be on our department to go out there and find those things and not always expect the schools and the teachers to be responsible for letting us know. We have lots of ways for them to do that. We have lots of Google Forms. They can send us information about what they want. If they have something for the podcast, they can send us information about, create a form and say, I'd like you to come visit my classroom or have something in the e-news. But I think it's really important for the people in my department to be out in the buildings and be visible. I think that is all that I have. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this, and I'm passionate about telling the stories of the students and the staff members in this district. And I'm really proud of the things that are going on in here. And I really want us to make sure that we're telling the stories that go from, as I say, from the boardroom to the classroom, from the budget to the classroom. Because one of the other things that the parents said in the communications audit was they wanted to know how what you're doing at this table affects their child in their classroom. And so that's really incumbent on our department to be able to tell those stories. I'm happy to take any questions.
I just want to say congratulations on your awards.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate what you said last, which is trying to impress upon the community what we're doing here and how that affects the classroom and then affects their student. I think that's really important. It's been such a long journey to try to tell that story. And I look forward to seeing your department in that translation. I know one of the new campaigns that we just learned about that's going to be coming out is D303 Extraordinary. Can you share a little bit about that? I know it's very specific, but I just wanted to hear a little bit about it.
Well, we've had some really great success with our campaigns over the last couple of years. And they're everything from hashtag D303 learns to hashtag D303 getting ready, where we post pictures of people that are getting ready before school starts. Because I think some people think, okay, the day before school starts, we go in and we turn on the lights and then we welcome in the kids. And there are so many pieces that go into getting a school ready. We've also done hashtag first day. So one of the things that Dr. Pearson asked us to do was really to talk about some of the
extraordinary things that are going on in the district.
Mhm.
Where are the people in our district that are going above and beyond? And with the campaigns that we've done previously, we have been very fortunate that our families have really engaged with us. And this has been a great opportunity for the families and the parents to be part of that conversation, letting us know what are the extraordinary things that they're seeing. What are their teachers doing? What are their custodians doing? What are the administrative assistants doing? What's the superintendent doing that's extraordinary? And then we can push that out, not only on social media, but in e-news and really tell those stories. So that's what that campaign is, and we're going to be launching that this week.
Awesome. One of the things I think that, this board was really happy about was when we implemented the across the board. So I'm assuming you're going to continue something along those lines. Will you be then trying to figure out how to translate some of our discussions and decisions and put that out on social media or through Parent Link? You're going to be utilizing all those resources the same to talk about how that affects said student for ABC parent.
I think that, and I actually have been kind of mulling this over about across the board, and really is across the board doing what it should be doing. There have been some when the meetings have had a lot of robust content where I feel like it's this laundry list of things. And are people really going to be reading that laundry list of things that are happening? So is there some way instead that we could take those stories of what's happening at the board table and translate it, as you say, into how is that going to be affecting the classroom? Instead of just saying, okay, this motion passed by a vote of 7-0. That's not very exciting.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily give our families the information that they want to know how that's affecting their children.
Yeah.
So that is something that I've been mulling over and something I've been thinking about. And now that we've been doing across the board, our families are reading it. Our staff members are reading it. So I don't want it to go away, but I think I need to revamp it to make it come alive.
Okay. I think that's a great point. I think some sort of translation of what we're doing here into everyday speak for parent staff, I think might have a little more insight because they're kind of living that every day. I know when I was a parent before I got on the board, sometimes you don't know exactly what emotion means when they're approving something, what it means for your kid. So I'm looking forward to that. I think the targets and the outcomes are very good. I mean, I'd like to see it all. I think we need it all. I mean, I'd love to see on there as part of it also some sort of, I don't want to say town hall, but some sort of discussion, priority of having a discussion with small groups about topics. So in person, I think that's the one thing we hear about is we don't get to have a two-way conversation with board members and or senior leadership in person. So how do we do that in person? So back in the day, they used to have summits, but they were very topic driven. But the concept of a summit was a great idea because you could be in a small group and have a conversation about something. So I don't know if you want to have a conceptual idea of sign up 50 or 100 people, once a month or once every 2 months or whatever it is. And the topic is going to be not COVID related, but maybe we're going to talk about mathematics one time, or we want to talk about CCR, for instance. I don't know. I can't think of topics right now.
Well, I think some of those things are covered with our parent university as well.
But it's
So
not 2-week conversation. So maybe discussion
true.
group afterwards. I don't know.
Well, and in some of those we have, in some of our parent university programming, we have had the opportunity to have a panel discussion. We've always had question and answer. It's been a little bit more difficult because we've done so many of those things online. So when our parent university programs have been in person, there's more opportunity at the end for some of that conversation with the speaker or with professionals from the district that have some expertise in those areas. But I understand what you're saying. And I really do think that the strategic planning process and also the equity audit are going to provide people with the opportunity to have those discussions in those smaller groups. And when we talk about portrait of a graduate, it's not just a one and done. It's here are all these things that we want our students to be able to know and to do. And it's exactly what Dr. Igo was talking about. So how does my department support that in making sure that people are invited, that people are welcomed, that people participate, and that they find that their participation is meaningful so they'll want to come back for the second time. A strategic planning process is not a one and done. So it's going to be a longer period of time. And then we also want to make sure that those conversations are robust enough and meaningful enough so that when we do present this portrait of a graduate, it really does mean something to not only our families and our teachers, but also to our students. We have to bring in that student voice.
And I think that's all important. I think to layer in board members into some of those might be a good idea. So general public has more access to conversational interaction with board members. So maybe we could do that. I think that's where the engagement piece is, because a lot of times people come here and they'll say their comments. And unfortunately, the way it's set up and board meetings, and really all board meetings across the state, there's no reciprocal two-way conversation. And that can be a really frustrating piece for a lot of people. So I think in some of these, and there's a lot of different communication setups that you're creating in these different groups, in the CAC and strategy and the facility utilization, where there's more, we're bringing in more community members and they can interact with different board members. I think that might be something for President Barker, but to, try to integrate different board members and different things that might give them more exposure.
Anyone have anything else? I will say that I agree with a lot of what you said, Mrs. Weibel. I think it's going to be something that we're going to talk about in a little bit when it comes to the CAC charge, and it being maybe one of the first topics that they do go over. So yeah, I think increasing the board's availability to have conversations with constituents and community members who desire to have those conversations. Although I will say, of course, you can always email and call us, and we will have those conversations. Set up several for this week. So keep that in mind. In the interim, if you're looking for a conversation, don't wait. You can ask for one at any time. Anyone else?
I would just like to congratulate you again on your awards. And if you haven't listened to Voice of D303, it's such a great podcast series, and I'm glad we're doing that. So thank you very much. And thank you for your work on CAC too. I appreciate it. Mrs.
You're very welcome.
I would like to also say that, yes, the awards, congratulations. But we have had some community members come back and say that they're not getting the communication. They're not getting the information that they need from the district. And I think sometimes, and I know that I appreciate that you're going to take a look at some of these things, and it's going to be revamping and getting the information, doing what the intention is, right? Getting the information to people. So I do appreciate that. I do want to make a suggestion about, as a parent of 4 students in the district, the amount of lengthy newsletters that I get in a week coming from different people at different buildings is overwhelming. And if somehow if we can start providing shorter snapshots of things that are important and that are going on within the district or within buildings, I think that would support parents getting some of that imperative information that might end up being buried in an email, in a newsletter that they scanned but missed that part of it or something like that. So I'm just thinking when you're going to revamp some of these things so that they do the intention, that's just it's the experience I've had for many years of trying to find out what applies to me and get the information. Anything else? No. Okay, so Dr. Pearson, when will we see this back?
So we will go in and try to populate some of the outcomes that we've identified in some of the benchmark data and bring back a second round because I think you and I need to talk about the timeline because we have an issue with the student performance data. And so maybe we do it in 2 steps. Perhaps we bring back everything but that piece just so that we can kind of get it rolling.
Okay.
And then we bring back the data. We'll figure out what makes the most sense, but my hope is that we can have this finalized within the next month.
Okay. All right, fantastic. All right, so a little bit to be determined, but pretty soon. So that brings us to our next for discussion item, the Citizens Advisory Committee charge. Mrs. McCabe and Mrs. Bell have a charge on the topic of communication drafted for us tonight. And then we need to give them some ideas on other topics we would like to have the CAC review this year. And those drafts then will be brought to the regular meeting on the 27th for discussion. Would you like to walk us through the draft, Mrs. McCabe and Mrs. Bell?
At our policy meeting, we discussed as a board how we wanted to, what we needed to do to address public comment at board meetings. And I think it was Mr. McNally suggested we bring it to the CAC. So what you have in your board packet is a task that we drafted. It's just a draft. So if it doesn't reach what you intended, we would like you to sign off on this. I don't know, Mrs. Barker, what has to be actually voted on because the first meeting of CAC is Thursday. And we think the task of that we put in front of you here can be done fairly quickly. It won't take months to do, but we want to get started. But we also need to know from this board, and we'd really like to have that in place at our next board meeting, if possible, what you want the CAC to focus on in a broader sense and in a bigger target for this year or continuing. The facilities plan is fairly complete, but we're still assuming we will be using the CAC as necessary to continue that process. And so you have the draft for the task at hand, and if you can give us your feedback on that. And then if you have ideas of what you'd like CAC to do, we would like to hear from you now, so we could maybe put together a draft charge that we could sign off on maybe next Monday. So
Can we take a step back? I may have missed a meeting here. What we are trying to charge the CAC with responding to our citizen comments?
at the policy meeting, Mrs. Barker had requested that we talk about public comment and on other ways that people might be able
Additional
to
ways.
speak at the board at the board table.
I would
instead of
say
in
take
person.
out the time limits because that is, I would say that
I guess I'm
that should be
confused. How does this
turned-
intertwine with the CAC?
So looking at what ways that they would like to have, be able to make public comment other than being in person. It was something we discussed more than once, actually.
Right, and we talked about
Mhm.
them leaving a record, a
Mhm.
recorded voice message, or sending an email and having it read.
Mhm.
So help me understand, why is this intertwining with a volunteer citizen group?
So looking at at options like that, and just coming up with, that's why I would say I'd take out the board, the time limits, because that has nothing to do with it, but what ways would the community who is making the citizens' comments, what would they be recommending as far as those sorts of options?
What would the CAC recommend to us about comments?
Mhm.
All right, so I'm gonna jump in here. So when we created, when I conceptualized the CAC in 19 and we created this, the concept of the CAC, which I don't think that we've seen it go to full fruition yet. I think we're slowly
No, we
getting there.
Kind of got,
Was to have the CAC be an extension of the audience in which we represent, 50,000, 48,000 people, and have that audience go to the members of the CAC with their concerns. And so things like we've seen, I mean, sadly, COVID kind of hijacked all that, but things about performance would have naturally filtered through the CAC. Things about equity would have naturally filtered through the CAC conceptually. Things about special ed, Compass Academy before it was created. So that's kind of the envision. And I know, Mrs. McCabe, you're nodding your head because you and I have had many, many hours of conversation and being on the same page about this. Conceptually, where kind of the CAC was, and being an extension of the board and trying to go out, gather information, be representatives of it, talk to the community, and then bring that information back to the board and be that conduit for us. Whereas sadly, social media stepped in over COVID because that is not an effective conduit. So that's kind of what it's always been envisioned for. And you guys have made incredible progress. Both Mrs. Barker, President Barker, and Mrs. McCabe, and now Kate. I see that's kind of where the future goes. I guess I don't know that we would put board comments into their bucket too. So they're kind of what I would consider issue-based. We don't want to lose, in my opinion, that connection with the community about them communicating directly to us.
I don't think it was,
that's
at
not
least
what
my
this says
at
at
least
all.
my understanding was that it was to reach out to the CAC as a way to give us ideas in which the community utilizing your idea, the community giving us feedback to the board through the CAC about new options for citizen comment or new ways or ideas and brainstorming.
So if I can jump in, because I was the one who had suggested that the CAC be involved, what my suggestion was not to give any board work over to the CAC, but they're there as an organization. We were trying to figure out what are some ways we can best help the community be able to communicate with us effectively, efficiently. And so I just suggested that we put the question to them, just put the question to them and have them brainstorm it, because those are the people that, as you say, represent the community. So have the CAC discuss it, come back, come up with suggestions, tell us what they think, and then we discuss those suggestions is kind of what my thought was when I suggested it anyway.
Okay, so that's the way it's to be utilized. So what you, the community, talk to your fellow community members and tell us what's the most effective, interested, preferred way to communicate with us. Is it via email? Obviously, we're gonna hear that they don't like the one-sided email, so, or speaking, and then bring us ideas and we then contemplate what the new options are.
Yes.
Okay.
If you look at the task that's in your board packet, it only speaks to public comment. It doesn't speak to all the ways. So if you want it to be broader than public comment, then we need to change the charge. The
Yeah,
one
I
thing
think
that.
I would add to it, to include.
Hold on just a
comment.
second. And then the thing that we learned when we did the facilities was that the charge was taken very seriously by the by the community and the committee members. If it was mushy, they didn't know what to do. And so that's why I'm going to be kind of a stickler on let's make sure the charge is clear, or else they will spin their wheels trying to do what we're asking them to do. I'm sorry, Mrs. Barker, go ahead.
I think I would include, in addition to additional ways to make specifically public comment, but make it so that we can look at what's working, what's not working with communication to the board members specifically, but then also how do we increase two-way communications? What would they like to see? What are some ideas?
I like that change. What's working, what's not working? What would you like to see that's you think will be effective? In two-way conversations, because I think just how do we handle public comment? I don't know that there's a lot of wiggle room there for interpretation. Or how do we want to deal with that? And I appreciate all your work, Mrs. Bell. I spaced your name for a second. It's starting to get past my bedtime. I know, sorry.
We're almost there.
I know. And it's very exciting to have a new round of community members, and thank you everyone that stayed, because the wonderful thing about those that we've brought on and the ones that have graduated off, and thank you to all those for your service, is that everyone does bring a new dynamic and an interesting demographic to it. And you guys have done a good job picking a variety of backgrounds. It's difficult.
I think I would also just kind of moving from this, and I know you're going to revamp it, and we'll see it again on the 27th. But I would like to see some of what we've talked about already tonight, strategic planning. Obviously, the CAC should be involved in that, and there should be a charge. It might be more broad right now until mushy, until we actually get into the midst of it. But knowing that that's a topic we're going to charge them with, the equity or in belonging aspect. Dr. Pearson, you mentioned profile of a graduate as well as something that the CAC should be charged with. And of course, continuing facilities. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that pile of topics.
I would like to get their feedback on what they think about it's not going to apply to everyone, but the college and career readiness process. So kind of what we're doing, and this might be a lot. There's all sorts of stuff, special ed. I have lots of different topics in my head. How's a special, we have a team, we already have a parent, teacher, parent, instructor. What's it called, Dr. Pearson? The parent instructor. Yeah, the committee. It's a parent instructor committee for special ed. Yeah, educator. So we have a group of people working on that process. But that would be good feedback to give them. And then the CCR process is how, that affects really 7 through 12. Could even be 6, I suppose.
But also as younger parents, parents of younger kids, one of the things that I think would be great to know from their perspective is, what are the things would you like to know along the way so you can be prepared when you get to high school?
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, it does. I'm not sure that completely applies K-5, but for sure 6 through 8.
Well, if we're going to be looking
If we're going to
at
be looking at
how middle
Algebra 1, it
school,
will. Yeah.
exactly, that was my point.
Yeah. No, I'm picking up what you're putting down. And I think what you're looking at in charging them with these different topics, that's what it was built for. And I think, as you're moving off such a heavy workload, to Mrs. Smith's point of the facility utilization plan, you can have multiple topics per meeting and then discuss it, move on and show results at next meeting or however you're going to work it. I think it's exciting because you'll be able to bring a lot of feedback back to the board.
One of the things that I think is a really big plus in having so many applicants is there are groups of people that we weren't quite able to fit right in based on, we wanted to make sure we were evening out voices from various portions of the community. And there might be somebody who we felt was really strong in, one portion. However, we had too many voices from that area. So it was important to me, and I think to all of us, to make sure that we have ways to include the public and candidates of people that wanted to be on the CAC, but we just didn't have enough room to pull them in or utilize them as specific resources for shorter topic assignments, because maybe they really wanted to be there, but they didn't have that time commitment or whatever.
Right.
And so I wouldn't be as concerned in charging the CAC with 8 various things, because they're going to have different lengths of time and we can group out.
Well,
in
so
certain
that
ways.
might be an idea for you to get other board members involved, is if you create focus groups for members that aren't part of the CAC. Say you have a 9 through 12 focus group, you're gonna talk about CCR, and you're bringing in people that you didn't put on CAC that are all high school parents. One of you can run it with a different board member and they can have exposure to a second board member. I don't know, just an idea. I'm stepping into a leadership role and giving ideas again. Sorry, just old habits die hard, but that's all.
I think what we have to be fair, and there are not a lot of people left, but we only get them for 2 hours once a month. And so in order for the board to get the kind of feedback they need, and in order to do it well, we don't want to hurry things through. And this, my thinking, and Dr. Pearson, just let me know, the strategic plan and the profile of graduate, are those 2 separate things?
They're connected. So we'll be doing both as a part of the strategic planning process. But they will be probably separate conversations, but all together. They'll be facilitated by the same group.
And that'll be later in the year.
Yes, our hope is that we would get that started by winter, so January-ish at the
Okay.
latest. So yes.
Okay, and then with the equity and belonging, Mrs. Barker, are you wanting something before the audit or during the audit, or yes to all things? I'm just trying to map out and so we can get to some of the
I
more.
think we need to decide on an equity audit before I could even give you a
Okay.
timeframe on that. So we have to finish our work on it, and perhaps they'll be connected in timeframe. I don't know. But as far as the strategic planning, but who knows, that could go hand in hand. I do want to add one more thing. I know there's some legislation that's coming out that's maybe causing people to. So I think there's some legislation that's coming out, and I think that maybe this might be a topic, maybe down the road. So just thinking like maybe after some of these topics, as it's coming down the pipeline, it's HB 818. Or maybe that's something once that gets all kind of fleshed out that we might want to keep on the back burner, that we could potentially utilize the CAC with.
President Barker, it's SB, sorry.
Oh, sorry, did I say HB?
That's
Sorry.
okay. No worries.
So it's SBA
8. SB 818.
Senate bill,
Thank
not
you.
House bill, sorry.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, and then also Mrs. Barker, do we need to vote on this?
I'm trying to remember what we did last year. When we the only time we did have a charge was actually with the facilities.
Right.
So I do think it's a good idea for us to go through that motion of taking it to action. So we all agree that these are the things that the CAC will be working on this year.
So for next Monday, we will redraft the task for the board to consider voting on, because now it's a broader topic than what you have in front of you. And could we have your permission to give our hope was that at the CAC meeting, we would give them some homework on board communication so that they could go and start doing the learning before could we do that on Thursday, even though you haven't voted on it?
I think if you're doing learning, I mean, it's
Just-
just learning about communication at this point. Is everyone comfortable with them learning about communication?
Yeah, I'm gonna be devil's advocate here and say, I feel like we're making this more complicated than it needs to be. And the CAC, when you're having like discussions where you're not taking action on anything financial, facility utilization plan was recommendations for a lot of financial things. So I certainly understand why you wanted to cross T's a little bit more on that. My personal opinion, just speaking for myself, is that, I mean, I don't feel like we need to run this through motions, but when we originally started talking about this, it was always supposed to be a monthly discussion about what's happening with discussion with our constituents, bring it back to the board. Board's supposed to give feedback. It's never really ran that way. And so I think you're gonna gunk up the works if you have to stop and vote on it all the time.
I think it's set up, and I'm speaking as a previous co-chair, but it is set up to have a portion of that be more fluid. That isn't necessarily task-based, that the board is giving work to the CAC. I think we haven't been able to do that portion of it because
And we have reorganized it a little bit.
I know, but we set it up so you guys came back and put it on the general agenda. I mean, the goal was, when we set it up, was to put it on the general agenda as a discussion point and say, well, what happened at the CAC? And then you put it on discussion at the end for if we wanted you to go back and kind of do something with that crew about rolling out the next step. But I mean, again, this is a board of 7. So if you guys want to make it evolved into something else, that's totally fine. I'm just telling you what the original intention was.
Well, if you read what we have in the board packet, it explains the intention that we did in 2019.
I also felt like we were making it more complicated than we needed to, and that was not the original intent of what it was
I'll just go
supposed to
back.
be.
I'll just go back to having a task that's very clear or a charge that's very clear helps the CAC members to know how to address the question. So if we were just to say, we want your feedback on board community relationships or communication, that's pretty wide open. And we can do that and we will lead it the best way we can, but it may not get to what Mrs. Barker was looking for or what you were looking for. And so it helps to have a clear task for us to lead and for our members to be able to do the work.
I understand. I also am speaking with, I mean, not just my own opinion. Several of your executive team members have been frustrated also in the last couple of years. So
I wish they had come and told us.
and they have.
Yeah, and we have talked to them, and to be honest, I'm hearing what Mrs. McCabe is saying, I'm hearing what Mrs. Weibel's saying. Some of the frustration has come out of not knowing what they're supposed to be doing and feeling as though they didn't have a clear, I guess, task, and spinning wheels. So some of that frustration has come out of that. So I do understand wanting to have, specific tasks. Not everything does need to be these are big items. These are big things, and we should have something down for that begins to look more clear as we get towards some of these things. The other piece of it is that there should be some time, and talking about revamping some there, but there should be some time to do the other piece of it too. Then this is what I was talking about, where it is more casual. Items are brought from the community to the table and things like that.
One thing I can say that was really interesting. Obviously, I wasn't there for the interviews the first time around, but it was an extremely common theme with the applicants saying, what does the CAC do? I don't even know what you do. And I think part of that is because it was started right as COVID began. And so it was a little difficult because there wasn't gatherings and such. So that made it harder. However, that was a really big flag for me to say there is, in the general community of all the people we interviewed, which was 30 something, a lot, pretty much nobody had an idea of clearly what does the CAC do. So to me, that says we need a little more direction, a little more clarity, but also we have to have both components where there's a task and there's also a line for feedback to the board from the community.
Okay. They'll tell us what to do and we will do our best. We just don't want to, no, we do not want to make it more complicated. But we do not want to waste people's time with just a topic. There needs to be, what we found is there needs to be learning and time for them to digest the concepts and the ideas, because they're not all educators by any means. And some of our people have not had kids in school for a while. So that we want to be sure that all voices are heard. That's our main point. These are great topics. There's no doubt about it. But it will evolve. It won't be exactly the way it looked under facilities. It will have its own piece. And, we have spent a lot of time with our exec team and listened to their concerns. If they still have concerns, then they should report to Mrs. Barker if they don't like how we are leading it. But we're trying our best to give the board valuable information. So tell us what to do, because we meet on Thursday.
So I'm okay with voting on it. The only reason I would say that vote on some of these topics, or whether or not they're turned into task statements at this time, just because I would want everyone to have agreement. But if we don't feel we need to vote on them, then there isn't not necessarily.
I like it being brought to the whole board because I think it also ensures consistent communication and everybody's on the same page as far as what the committee is going to focus on.
So, Mrs. Fairgrave, are you saying you would prefer that we vote on it?
Yes.
Okay. So does that mean it can't happen until next week, or we can vote now.
Well, let me clarify though. I did agree with Mrs. Barker's earlier comments, as far as what your proposed agenda was for Thursday related to giving activities or tasks related to board communications and so forth. I don't have any issue with that because I'm not hearing anybody has that as concern for a topic. So
I think we kind of all agreed, if I'm not mistaken, although I don't know that we took a formal vote, but I think we all agreed. And I'll look around and see if I get nodding heads, but that was something that we thought was a good idea for them to do, to determine the best way for us as a board to interact, for the community to be able to speak with the board. So I really don't have a problem
I agree with Mr.
them going
McNally.
ahead with that.
And Mrs. Fairgrave, to your point, we should be talking about it every month. We were intended to talk about it every month and to give feedback from the board to the representatives every month. So I certainly encourage the representatives to do that again. I was disappointed during the facility utilization process that did not happen. I know that was different, but I think we were kept quite in the dark about that. So
I think I'm going to ask you to, and I'm sorry, I feel like you and I are antagonistic again tonight. We did have updates all the time from the facilities plan, and we reported every month from the CAC. So if you felt you were in the dark, maybe you can fill me in a little more so we don't have that happen again.
And it's not antagonistic. I have not been shy about not liking the projection of CAC since it was created. I think I've not been quiet about that. So it's nothing personal, but there's a board of 7 here and we can control the projection of this committee or we can not. So I appreciate that we're having the discussion tonight because we're actually trying to kind of take it by the horns tonight for the first time in a long time. So I'm optimistic, but it's been disappointing that it hasn't been like that for a while. So that's what I mean. It's not personal to you.
And I guess I'm confused. And it's so late to have this discussion, but I'm going to ask the other board members to weigh in because we don't talk about committee structures. I don't say to Mrs. Fairgrave, business service does this, and I don't talk to Mr. McNally or you about L&T. So when you're looking at the committee that we're co-chairing, I want it to be meaningful to the board. And we do plan extensively for what the members are going to do. And the facilities committee did an enormous amount of work. When they had things that were able to be reported, it came to the board, both through the architect, and they came like 2 or 3 times to the board as to what they were doing. It wasn't a two-way conversation at that time because they were in the process of the work. Though they did ask us for questions and very rarely got any until the presentation. So I don't know if you're not getting what you need, then
I would encourage board members, and I apologize, Ms. McCabe.
I can't hear you.
I apologize, I'm interrupting. I would encourage board members to actually attend the meetings and actually see the structure and see the conversation and see what's going on. And we can bring this back to have a discussion about direction and is it working to elicit what we need? But I think, to be honest, Mrs. McCabe and I, and occasionally Mrs. Bible, you when we were in person, you did come to the meetings. There wasn't other board members didn't often come to those meetings, and there were exec meetings as well as full CAC meetings, so it was double the meetings. So I'm going to encourage everyone to just be maybe a little more involved. Watch if you do them, in person, and or attend, so that we can all kind of have an understanding of how it's operating, since it's newer, different, and got kind of interrupted by some events. So as far as the topics, are we good with the topics? So Mrs. McCabe and Mrs. Bell can go ahead and kind of write up some thoughts about it.
I think as a focus group of the broader, representing the citizens and the constituents of the district as a whole, the concept of the CAC works exceedingly well. I think the feedback and the constructive contributions that they made during the facilities management process and review process were outstanding. It created a much broader set of insights than we might have had otherwise. So as a body that can provide one lens into how the community at large may react to some of the issues that we've discussed, it's an effective data gathering and insight gathering exercise. When I think about the specific charges that we might place at its feet, the idea of having this board say, these are the 4 or 5, or this is the cadence by which we would like this committee to consider these issues and bring its opinions back, makes sense to me. The idea that we as a group would pick those in a vote also makes sense to me. They should be the issues that we think are not only important, but also have a diverse enough set of opinions in the community that it requires as many lenses of insight as we can gather as a board. And so when I think about the amount of feedback that we as board members and as a board as a whole get associated with communications, particularly at board meetings and citizens' comments, it seems like exactly the kind of issue that we would like the Citizens Advisory Committee to talk about the process of and to provide us with the community's perspective about. In addition, we've talked about a lot of big issues that could be potential issues for the CAC to address. It feels to me that we should have a process for saying, here's the cadence at which we would decide which issues the CAC addresses. And I do think those are issues that we should decide in this council and then hand to with specific tasks. The idea of asking them to weigh in on the citizens' comments process, I think is absolutely appropriate, and I certainly endorse that. I'd like to see us pick the list of things that we would like them to really investigate and to provide us with counsel about as a group here at the board table. And so I heard a lot mentioned as potential issues. It strikes me that we ought to pick 3 or 4 and then be ready to pivot when new issues arise.
Maybe we can bring this entire list and say, you know, as a board, we're selecting, to Mr. Lackner's point, 3, 4, whatever the number is, but these are all topics should this become an issue that we're interested in this year, and leave that door open, as Mrs. Barker was saying, that there's the direct task, but also the community input based on, you know, what's going on or what's the topic or whatever.
Yeah, Mrs. Bell, I think that makes sense. I think that makes complete sense. If you come and if the charge comes back and we have 3 or 4 that, and we're in agreement, are the priority initially, and then the remainder are in the queue, so to speak, and we can reprioritize throughout the year.
I'm guessing
with
that many of them are paying attention right now and know what some of those charges are. So I think we're kind of gilding the lily here right now. I think they know some of the things that we want them to think about. I think what we probably ought to do is say that on Thursday, the topic we discussed 3 weeks ago, or whatever it was, that we said that we wanted them to discuss ought to be the one they're discussing. And then these other topics are things, and that's going to give them 2 hours. They're going to have 2 hours worth of discussion on that, I'm sure.
Yeah, at minimum.
So I think, you know, we're really overthinking this for the moment. On Thursday, we've got a short-term thing. Thursday, what is their topic? I think their topic is what we already said it was. And then we can discuss these other topics and we can have that discussion. And right now, they already know what they need to think about. I think they're already thinking about it anyway. That's how it came to us.
Mr. Lackner, thank you for summarizing that in a astute and succinct way, by the way. And Mr. McNally, your point is perfect. I think they, like myself, are probably anxious and ready to actually get moving post-COVID. Because it has, obviously been an impediment to some of the work, so.
Yeah, and to a good structure as well. I mean, we struggled through a lot of virtual meetings that partially virtual, partially in person. There were some difficulties that were created by that. So I do like the idea. Okay, we've got one. Others are in the queue when we're ready for them. Like I said, we have to make some decisions about some of the stuff anyway first. Those are in the queue. We'll bring them up one at a time as need be. Okay, so
we're not needing to prepare to vote on certain things, and Mrs. McCabe and I do not need to create a motion for next Monday? Or we do? I'm so confused right now.
just for the communication one, is that what I'm understanding? Just for the one that we've already agreed?
That was my thought, is that we would start with that, and then we can kind of discuss those other things, whatever else the future charges will be, but I think we have a charge for them right now.
Okay.
They're not going to waste their time Thursday night. They have something to talk about.
Well,
But right
for-
now, we're talking about stuff, quite literally.
True, I get that. But we either have a precedent, because this is a new committee, we either have a precedent or we don't. We either vote on these things
Yeah.
officially or we don't.
That-
And so we need to make a decision, and maybe it goes back to policy. I don't really know, but we have to make some sort of decision. So we're not haphazardly deciding this each and every year.
That would be my concern as well. My preference would be that we vote. That's what we've talked about. I believe that's what we did historically. And just to be consistent
Mhm.
in our process, that's what we do. And based on, to your point, Mr. McNally, prior discussions, it shouldn't take a lot of time.
So on Thursday, the CAC will do learning around communication, but won't discuss the task because we'll vote on it Monday.
All right, that
Okay.
helps. Thank you.
All right, are we ready to move on to adjournment? Yes, yes, okay, great.
So moved.
There's no closed session this evening, so may I have a motion to adjourn the special board meeting? No.
So moved.
No comments. No,
Oh,
okay, sorry, yep, sorry about that. No citizens' comments. We're not having closed session this evening. May I have a motion to adjourn the special board meeting, September
So moved.
20th? Great, meeting adjourned at, hang on.
Roll.
Got to do the roll. We got to agree.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Miss Weibel,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave,
Yes.
and Mrs. Barker.
Yes. Meeting adjourned, September 20th, 2021